The ghost in the machine. It begins in darkness, not the kind you fear, but the kind that feels infinite, velvet black, still, and patient. From that silence, a single thought rises. No sound, no color, only awareness. A whisper of existence that asks the oldest question in philosophy: am I real? Centuries ago, a man sat before such a candle. The year was 1640, and his name was René Descartes. He had turned away from the noise of the world, the wars, the politics, the superstition, to ask a question so simple it could shatter everything. What, if anything, can I know for certain? In a time when science and religion clashed like thunder, Descartes sought something unshakable, a foundation of truth that no tyrant, priest, or skeptic could take away. But to find it, he would have to doubt everything, even his own body. He began where all certainty seemed to live: the senses, the warmth of the candle, the sound of wind outside the window, the steady beat of his heart. But the more he examined them, the more fragile they became. What if the senses lie? What if the warmth, the sound, the heartbeat, all are illusions inside a dream? This was no idle speculation. It was an experiment in demolition. Descartes would tear down the entire house of knowledge until he found one brick that could not be doubted. And so he began to imagine a world without sight, without touch, without sound, a world where even the laws of physics might be the trick of a clever deceiver. That deceiver would become his famous invention, the evil demon, a being capable of fabricating a total illusion, a simulated world indistinguishable from reality. For Descartes, this was not horror fiction. It was philosophy at its purest edge, because if such deception were possible, then how could one trust anything the senses reveal? Every sight, every sound, every heartbeat could be nothing more than a signal inside a mind suspended in illusion. If this feels eerily familiar, it should. The same question haunts our age, only now we call it the simulation hypothesis. Scientists, engineers, and philosophers still ask whether the world around us could be a vast, coded illusion, an echo of Descartes' demon dressed in modern circuitry. But Descartes wasn't trying to prove the world false. He was trying to find what remained true, even if it were false. He looked deeper, beneath perception, beneath the body, beneath even the possibility of deception itself. And there he found a flicker of certainty. He realized that even if everything he perceived was false, even if every sight, every sound, every physical experience was a trick, there still had to be a someone being deceived. There still had to be a thinker, a witness, a point of awareness. I think, therefore I am. It's easy to dismiss that sentence as a slogan, but in Descartes' time, it was a revolution. The first stone laid in the foundation of modern philosophy, a declaration that existence begins not in flesh or form, but in awareness. The mind is not just part of the world, it might be the only thing we can be sure of. This realization divided existence into two realms, the res cogitans, the thinking thing, and the res extensa, the extended thing, the world of matter. Between them stood a vast chasm, the mind and the body, forever entangled, yet distinct. For the first time, consciousness was treated as something fundamentally different from the physical world, a ghost haunting a machine of flesh. This would echo for centuries, influencing not only philosophy but science, psychology, and even artificial intelligence. But this separation came with a haunting consequence. If the mind is one substance and the body another, how do they meet? How does thought move matter? How does the invisible give orders to the visible? Descartes called this the mind-body problem, and it has never truly been solved. Today, neuroscientists scan brains looking for the source of thought, but what they find are sparks and signals, not ideas. Philosophers call it the hard problem of consciousness. How does a physical brain create subjective experience? The echo of Descartes' ghost still lingers in every lab, every debate, every sleepless night spent wondering whether the mind is more than its neurons. And yet, Descartes' idea was not meant to divide us. It was meant to protect us. In a world where the senses could deceive, where faith could be forced, where truth could be burned at the stake, he built a sanctuary for certainty inside the self. Thought, he claimed, is indestructible. Even if everything else vanishes, awareness remains. But this fortress came with loneliness. Because if you can trust only your own mind, how do you know anyone else truly exists? How do you bridge the gap between self and world, between inner certainty and outer reality? This is the paradox of Descartes. The same man who gave us modern science also gave us the solitude of doubt. His search for certainty freed human reason, but it also isolated it. We became masters of knowledge, but strangers to the world that knowledge describes. And yet, there's something strangely peaceful about this solitude. In the quiet space between thought and reality, Descartes found not despair, but clarity. He saw that even if the universe were a dream, awareness itself would still be real within it. The mind became a lantern glowing in the void, its light proof enough that something exists to hold it. Take a moment to imagine that. A single light, surrounded by infinite uncertainty, still burning, still thinking, still existing. Perhaps that's all any of us are, brief glimmers of consciousness, observing a mystery too vast to comprehend. Machines of flesh, yes, but haunted by something that no equation can quite describe. And that haunting thought leads us to the next question. If the body can deceive, and the senses can lie, then what exactly is left to trust? The great deceiver, when reality lies to you. Imagine waking up in a world that looks exactly like yours. The same bed, the same clock ticking softly, the same reflection staring back at you in the mirror. But something feels wrong. Not in what you see, but in what you trust. The texture of the world seems hollow, as if reality itself were whispering a lie. That's the question Descartes confronted when he imagined the evil demon, an all-powerful deceiver capable of fabricating a complete illusion. Not a demon in the religious sense, but a symbol for ultimate doubt. A being who could rewrite every sensory input, every sound, every feeling, every belief you've ever held, and you would never know. For Descartes, this wasn't fantasy. It was method, a radical act of purification. If a deceiver of infinite cunning could fool him, then anything open to deception must be discarded. Every belief drawn from the senses, every conclusion based on habit or experience, gone. Only what remained absolutely certain could survive this imaginary trial. The power of this idea lies not in the demon, but in what it exposes, how fragile our trust in reality truly is. Think about it. Everything you know comes through perception. The warmth of sunlight, the sound of a friend's voice, the feeling of your heartbeat, all of it is translated by nerves, filtered by a brain that itself could be mistaken. Descartes realized that our senses are not windows to truth. They are storytellers. They weave narratives from light and vibration, touch and taste, turning chaos into coherence. But what if the story is false? If your senses have ever betrayed you, a mirage in the heat, a dream that felt real, you've experienced a tiny fraction of what Descartes' demon represents. This wasn't mere skepticism. It was the birth of a new kind of philosophy, one willing to question even the ground it stands on. By imagining a deceiver capable of total illusion, Descartes forced himself into a corner, either discover something that deception cannot touch, or accept that nothing can ever be known. It's no coincidence that this idea now feels eerily modern. The evil demon is the spiritual ancestor of the simulation hypothesis, the theory that our universe might be a highly advanced digital construct. Philosophers like Nick Bostrom and even technologists like Elon Musk echo Descartes when they wonder if our world might be a sophisticated rendering, every detail generated by some unseen system. In both cases, the question isn't whether the illusion exists, it's whether truth survives inside it. If all perception can be forged, what is left that can't be faked? Descartes' answer, as we saw before, was the mind, the thinking self. But before reaching that sanctuary, He had to wander through the labyrinth of doubt, guided only by the faint light of reason. The demon was a mirror reflecting his own fear that every structure of knowledge built by humanity, religion, science, sensation, experience, might rest on sand. This was not a comfortable doubt. It was existential, almost spiritual, a stripping away of everything that gives life stability. He asked himself, if there is a deceiver, would it not be possible that even mathematics, the very language of certainty, might be false? That 2 and 2 could equal 5 in a world governed by deception. It was a terrifying thought. For a moment, imagine what that feels like. Not to doubt a single idea, but to doubt the very act of knowing. To feel reality crumble, not because of madness, but because of logic. This was Descartes' brilliance. He followed reason until it devoured itself. And yet the demon was never meant to destroy. It was meant to test, the way fire tests metal, or storms test the strength of ships. What cannot withstand deception must be discarded. What survives must be truth. Take a moment to feel that idea. How much of your world do you accept simply because it's consistent? You wake, you work, you sleep, and the rhythm seems proof enough that everything is real. But consistency is not certainty. Dreams are consistent too, until they aren't. This is where Descartes' demon becomes more than a philosophical trick. It becomes a psychological mirror. Because even if there is no deceiver, we deceive ourselves. We build inner illusions of who we are, what we deserve, what we fear. The demon, in that sense, lives within us, not as an external manipulator, but as the bias, denial, and wishful thinking that shapes our private worlds. Every day, people live inside self-made simulations, the narratives they tell about success, failure, love, or meaning. We believe because we must, but belief is a kind of blindness too. Descartes' radical doubt offers a strange form of clarity, not to erase the world, but to wake within it. If the senses can't be trusted, perhaps awareness can. If perception wavers, perhaps reflection holds. The demon's whisper forces a turning inward, a redirection of faith from the external world to the interior mind. There, Descartes would find his unshakable truth, but only after walking through this valley of uncertainty. For Descartes, this inner journey was not despairing. It was purifying. He stripped away everything that could deceive, until what remained could not be deceived. The self-thinking mind became the anchor that held against illusion. But the demon's presence never truly left. Even after Descartes built his philosophy of reason and faith, that possibility, the shadow of deception, lingered. Because the deeper you look for certainty, the more you see how fragile it is. The demon was not a creature to defeat. It was a truth to live with. And in that realization lies a quiet kind of peace. The recognition that doubt is not the enemy of truth. It's the proof that we care enough to search for it. The demon becomes less a villain and more a teacher, forcing awareness to rise above illusion, to find something that cannot be faked. So when you close your eyes tonight, and the edges of reality soften, think of Descartes' question, not as a warning, but as an invitation to ask, what can I truly know? Not what others say, not what you see, but what you can feel as unmistakably real inside the silence of your own mind. Because that's where the deceiver's power ends and awareness begins. The collapse of certainty, doubting everything. There's a peculiar silence that descends when everything familiar begins to dissolve. The mind, stripped of its anchors, drifts through a sea of uncertainty, no longer sure what is true, what is illusion, or whether there's even a difference. That was the silence Descartes entered when he decided to doubt everything. For most of us, doubt feels like danger. It threatens the delicate order that keeps our lives coherent. But for Descartes, doubt was not chaos. It was a method. He saw it as the only path to genuine truth. To find something indestructible, he had to destroy every fragile certainty first. He called this radical act the method of doubt. It wasn't emotional hesitation or confusion. It was a deliberate surgical skepticism. He questioned every belief he had inherited, his senses, his memories, even his reasoning. If any belief could be doubted, even slightly, he would discard it. What remained, he decided, must be absolutely certain. This was not a philosophical game. It was an existential stripping away. He imagined his entire life collapsing in thought, the streets of France, the sound of church bells, the feel of parchment under his fingers, all reduced to the possibility of illusion. It was as if he had burned the world down inside his mind, leaving only the ashes of thought behind. It takes courage to doubt this deeply, because the mind craves stability. It clings to patterns and names, to routines that feel real. But when Descartes questioned even those foundations, he encountered something strange, an awareness that remained even when everything else vanished. He described the process like a demolition. Each wall of certainty crumbled one after another. The senses, unreliable. The body, a machine prone to error. The external world, possibly a dream. Even mathematics, once his refuge, trembled under the possibility of deception. And when the dust settled, one voice remained, the silent witness behind every thought. To understand the weight of this moment, imagine standing on the edge of an ocean that stretches beyond sight. Beneath you, the ground dissolves, and yet you do not fall, because something remains, the very awareness of falling. That awareness, that bare consciousness, became for Descartes the first indestructible truth. Even if I am deceived, even if I dream, even if I doubt, there must be an I who doubts. This was not arrogance. It was survival. A mind, lost in uncertainty, finding its single point of stability, like a sailor clinging to a floating plank in a storm. Descartes realized that the act of doubting itself required existence. Doubt proved the doubter. From this point, everything else could begin. But notice how paradoxical it is. Certainty was born from the very act of doubting. The destruction of belief became the foundation of knowledge. In that way, Descartes transformed doubt from a weakness into a form of strength. He wasn't the first to ask what can be known for certain, but he was the first to pursue it with mathematical precision. He treated philosophy like geometry. If truth could be reduced to a single, undeniable axiom, then all knowledge could be rebuilt logically from there. But there's a quiet tragedy in that ambition, because while it gave birth to the scientific method, it also introduced a new kind of loneliness. If all that can be trusted is thought itself, then where does that leave the world? This separation became the modern condition. We no longer experience the world directly. We analyze it, define it, measure it. The senses no longer give truth. Instruments do. The self no longer belongs to nature. It stands apart, observing. The dream of certainty that Descartes began still echoes in every lab, every algorithm, every theory that seeks to make sense of existence through reason alone. But reason is not peace. To think is to question, and to question is to disturb. The mind that doubts everything never fully rests. Descartes knew this. He wrote of nights spent in solitude, haunted by the very clarity he sought. His method brought light, but it also cast new shadows. Take a moment to reflect on that paradox. The man who founded modern certainty was also the one who taught us to mistrust every certainty. His doubt liberated us, but it also left us endlessly searching for a ground that may not exist. And yet, in this uncertainty, there's a strange serenity, because once you realize that certainty may never be complete, you stop grasping for it. You begin to live, as Descartes did, in the awareness itself, the quiet place where thought observes its own existence. That awareness is unshaken by illusion. It doesn't need to know whether the world outside is real, because it has already discovered something deeper, the simple miracle that awareness is. The collapse of certainty, then, was not an ending. It was a beginning. From the ruins of false beliefs, Descartes built a philosophy that could survive even deception. But it also hinted at a deeper truth, that perhaps the search for absolute certainty is itself a form of illusion. That life's meaning may not come from what we know, but from what we experience, even if that experience cannot be proven. Because sometimes the most honest answer is not "I know," but "I am aware." Descartes' demolition of certainty didn't destroy truth. It revealed its hidden shape, the shape of awareness itself, fragile yet eternal, floating at the center of everything we call reality. So as the dust of doubt settles, Descartes stands at the edge of his own mind, alone but awake. The world around him might be an illusion, but the awareness looking upon it is undeniably real. And in that quiet certainty, the storm of skepticism fades. Still, one question remains. If the senses deceive, and even logic can falter, what then can guarantee that the truth we find inside is not another illusion? Cogito, ergo sum, the birth of the self. The world had fallen away. Descartes sat in the quiet aftermath of destruction, every belief, every sense, every certainty dismantled by doubt. Yet something remained, a flicker of awareness, faint but indestructible. It was not tied to place, time, or even body. It simply was. And from that flicker, a new truth would be born. For weeks, Descartes had doubted everything that could be doubted. The senses might lie. Memory could be a dream. Even logic, the proud creation of reason, could be manipulated by an unseen deceiver. But there was one thing the deceiver could never erase: the very act of being deceived. He realized that doubt itself proved something. Every thought of uncertainty confirmed that there was a thinker. Every illusion required a witness. Every deception implied consciousness capable of perceiving it. From that insight came one of the most enduring phrases in all philosophy: Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. It is so simple, it feels almost trivial. But it was the moment modern philosophy began. The mind had discovered itself, not through the world, but through thought alone. Existence was no longer defined by what one sees or touches. It was defined by the very awareness that experiences those things. Take a moment to feel that thought. Imagine that everything around you, your room, your body, even the sound of this voice, is uncertain. Now notice the awareness that observes all of it. That awareness is not illusion. It is the one thing that cannot be doubted because doubt itself arises within it. For Descartes, this was like finding an island after an ocean of uncertainty. At last, something unshakable, something that could not be undone by dreams, deception, or doubt. The fact that he thought, even if everything he thought was false, proved that he existed as a thinking thing. Yet the deeper you contemplate this idea, the stranger it becomes. Who, or what is the I that thinks? Descartes identified it as the res cogitans, the thinking substance, a self that exists independently of the body, the world, or anything external. This self is not a physical thing, but a mode of being, pure thought, pure consciousness. He wrote, I am, I exist, this is certain. But for how long? For as long as I think. For it could be that if I ceased to think, I would cease to be. That sentence captures the haunting beauty of his discovery. Existence, he realized, was not something static. It was a process. To be is to think. Awareness is not an object but an act, always alive, always moving. Descartes' insight didn't end with philosophy. It would shape the birth of modern science and psychology. The thinking self became the foundation for individualism, the idea that truth begins inside the mind rather than outside it. It gave rise to the notion of personal identity, free will, and self-reflection. But it also opened the door to isolation. Because if the only thing you can truly know is your own mind, what about everything else? What about other people, the world, God? The Cogito offered certainty, but it also sealed the self inside its own walls. A fortress of thought, safe from deception, but separated from the world it longed to understand. And yet, Descartes did not see this as imprisonment. He saw it as liberation. The Cogito meant that the human mind carried within it a spark of divinity, a capacity for truth that no external force could corrupt. It was a declaration of inner sovereignty. In a time when authority came from the church, Descartes shifted it inward. Truth was no longer dictated from above. It was discovered within every individual by the act of thinking, possessed direct access to existence itself. But the simplicity of cogito, ergo sum, hides a subtle paradox. The I that thinks is both certain and unknowable. You can never step outside your own consciousness to observe it. The self that knows can never fully know itself. This paradox would echo through centuries of philosophy. Who are we, if not the thinker behind every thought? But who is that thinker, if every thought changes with time? Descartes' insight began the long search for the nature of consciousness, a search that continues to this day. Neuroscientists still cannot explain how the firing of neurons creates the feeling of being you. The Cogito remains the first and final mystery of existence, the undeniable awareness that cannot be measured, mapped, or defined. At its core, Descartes' discovery is profoundly spiritual. It tells us that beneath all illusion, beyond all knowledge, there is an essence untouched by deception, the simple act of awareness. When you strip away your name, your memories, your beliefs, what remains is not nothingness, it's presence, the quiet certainty that you are. Descartes found this truth not in revelation or ritual, but in solitude. His method was radical self-examination, a turning inward so complete that even the world disappeared. And in that silence, he found the one truth that required no proof. It's easy to take this for granted today, to repeat, I think, therefore I am, as if it were obvious. But in Descartes' time, it was heresy to claim that truth could come from within rather than from divine authority. His simple sentence dismantled centuries of dogma. It was the birth of the modern self, the recognition that the mind is not a passive receiver of truth, but an active creator of it. And yet, even as he celebrated this discovery, Descartes felt its weight. To exist as a thinking being was both freedom and burden. The Cogito confirmed life, but it also placed the entire responsibility for meaning within the self. There was no longer any external authority to lean on, only thought, only awareness, only the infinite echo of I am. In the centuries that followed, philosophers would challenge, expand, and reinterpret Descartes' words, but none could escape their gravity. Because no matter how far thought travels into science, psychology, or metaphysics, it always begins from that same foundation, the undeniable experience of being aware. The phrase, I think, therefore I am, is not a statement of pride, it's a confession of humility. It admits that everything else might be illusion, but this one light, this awareness cannot be extinguished. It burns quietly beneath every experience, every perception, every dream. Take a moment to feel that flame inside yourself, the soft pulse of awareness that watches thought arise and fade, the same awareness that Descartes discovered in the silence of his mind nearly 4 centuries ago. That light is the foundation of all certainty, the self that endures even when everything else collapses. The thinking thing, the mind unveiled. After the thunder of doubt, silence returned. Descartes sat alone, surrounded by the ruins of certainty, with only one truth left standing, the Cogito. Yet within that fragile realization, something vast was hidden. To say I think, therefore I am, was to uncover the most mysterious thing of all, the mind itself. What exactly was this thinking thing that survived every doubt? Descartes began to explore its contours, not as an abstract idea, but as the very essence of his being. If the body could be doubted, if the senses could be deceived, then the mind, the act of thinking, was the only part of him that could not be erased. He called it the res cogitans, the thinking substance. It was not made of flesh, nor bound by space or weight. It was something entirely different, immaterial, invisible, and independent. He could imagine a world without his body, but not a world without thought. Even imagining the absence of the body required a mind to imagine it. Here Descartes drew one of philosophy's most daring distinctions, the division between mind and matter. Matter, he said, was extended. It occupied space. It had size, shape, and motion. The mind, by contrast, had none of these qualities. It was not in space. It was pure thought, existing nowhere and everywhere at once. This simple idea changed the course of philosophy forever, because it implied that the human being is not just a machine of flesh and nerves, but something more, a self-aware observer standing apart from the material world. The body could be broken down into mechanics, but the mind was untouchable. But this separation created as many mysteries as it solved. If mind and body were distinct, how did they interact? How could an immaterial thought move a material arm? How could the invisible will translate into muscle and motion? Descartes would later suggest that this interaction took place in the pineal gland, a tiny structure deep within the brain. He believed it was the meeting point between the soul and the body, a bridge between two kinds of substance. Today we know it regulates sleep and hormones, not spirit, but in Descartes' time, it was the most plausible link between the seen and unseen. But perhaps the real bridge was not physical at all. Perhaps it was awareness, the invisible current flowing through every perception. For when you move your hand, you don't feel the machinery of muscle and bone. You feel intention. You feel will. Descartes recognized that no matter how much science might explain the body, it could never explain that experience from the inside. To feel, to will, to imagine, these are not physical processes. They are acts of consciousness. And in them, the mystery of the thinking thing deepens. He performed a simple experiment to demonstrate this. He took a piece of wax. Freshly taken from the hive, it was solid, fragrant, and cold. When brought near the flame, it melted. Its texture changed. Its scent vanished. Its shape dissolved. Yet he knew it was still the same wax. What had remained constant, he realized, was not the wax as perceived by the senses, but the idea of the wax within the mind. The senses saw difference. The mind recognized sameness. It was reason, not perception, that truly grasped reality. This simple example revealed something profound. The mind doesn't merely receive the world. It interprets it. It creates patterns, draws meaning, connects what the senses only scatter. Thought is not passive. It shapes reality from within. And that realization has haunted philosophy ever since. Because if the mind shapes what we know, then how much of what we call the world is actually a reflection of ourselves? Descartes' world was mechanistic, a clockwork universe governed by geometry and motion. Yet even in that ordered system, he believed there was something irreducible, something no equation could capture consciousness. The thinking thing was not an object among objects. It was the light by which all objects were seen. And that light, he believed, was the image of the divine within us, the part of the human being that reflected the perfection of God. The mind was not only proof of existence, it was a glimpse of eternity. But the gift of self-awareness came with a cost. To know oneself as a thinking thing was also to feel the abyss between thought and world. The body could be measured, but the self could not. The hand might touch the flame, but the mind that feels the pain remains unreachable. This duality, mind is eternal, body is temporal, would shape centuries of debate. Some would call it liberation. Others, exile. It gave birth to science, which studied the material world, and to psychology, which studied the immaterial. And yet both still circle the same mystery. Descartes first uncovered what is the connection between awareness and form. He didn't claim to have all the answers. His goal was not to explain consciousness, but to establish its certainty. He wanted a foundation upon which knowledge could stand unshaken, and he found it not in matter but in mind. Take a moment to reflect on that. Every thought you have ever had, every emotion, every dream, each exists not in space, but in awareness. You have never seen your own mind, and yet you live entirely within it. For Descartes, this awareness was the only true constant. Everything else, your body, your memories, even your perception of the world, might change, decay, or disappear, but awareness itself endures. It is the silent witness to every moment. In discovering this, Descartes did not merely redefine philosophy. He changed the meaning of selfhood. The human being was no longer just part of nature. It was something capable of knowing nature, something capable of turning inward and saying, I am the one who thinks. And so, as Descartes gazed into the candle's flicker, he no longer saw wax or flame, matter or illusion. He saw the reflection of thought itself, the invisible presence that had survived every doubt, the mind, unveiled. In that fragile glow, the world seemed reborn. No longer a place of uncertainty, but a mystery to be understood through the clarity of reason. Yet this raised a new question, one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. If the mind is separate from the body, what gives it truth? What ensures that the ideas within it correspond to reality rather than illusion? The senses as shadows. When perception betrays reality, there are moments when the world feels completely trustworthy, when sunlight warms your skin, when you hear your own footsteps echo on stone, when the scent of rain tells you where you are. Yet behind this comfort lies a quiet deception. The senses, those faithful messengers of reality, are also the most elegant liars we know. For Descartes, this realization came like a fracture in the mirror of the world. He had already discovered that the mind was certain, indestructible, and self-aware. But what of the world the mind observes? Could he still trust the eyes that saw it, the ears that heard it, the hands that touched it? He began with a simple truth. The senses sometimes deceive. A straight stick half submerged in water looks bent. A distant sound seems nearer than it is. The moon appears larger on the horizon than in the sky. These are harmless tricks of perception, easily explained. But Descartes pushed further. If the senses fail sometimes, why should they be trusted at all? He imagined that everything the senses reveal might be a grand illusion. The warmth of the fire, the solidity of the chair beneath him, even the beating of his own heart, each might exist only within consciousness. The senses, he realized, don't bring us reality itself. They bring us representations of reality, impressions formed inside the mind. To understand this, he turned again to the example of wax. The senses told him it changed shape, smell, and texture as it melted, but the mind told him it was still the same thing. From this, he concluded that sensory experience gives only the surface of things, while the mind grasps their essence. The eyes see shadows. Reason reveals the form that casts them. Modern science has confirmed what Descartes sensed intuitively. The colors we see don't exist out there. They're interpretations of wavelengths. The sounds we hear are not vibrations themselves, but the brain's translation of movement through air. Even taste and touch are neural codes, not direct contact with the world. In other words, we never experience reality directly. We experience the brain's simulation of it. For Descartes, this realization was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it meant the world could be an elaborate illusion. Liberating because it revealed the mind's creative power. The senses provided only fragments. It was thought that assembled them into a world. But here lies the paradox. If perception is a simulation, how can we know that our reason isn't part of the same illusion? Descartes could no longer trust experience, but neither could he ignore it. The senses may be unreliable, yet they are the only way the external world ever reaches us. He compared them to windows covered in stained glass, beautiful but distorting. You can see the light, but never the source. The world appears colored by the mind that looks through it. This insight foreshadowed centuries of psychology and neuroscience. We now know the brain constructs perception through prediction, guessing what the senses should reveal and filling in the gaps. You don't just see, you interpret. You don't just hear, you imagine the sound's cause. Reality, in that sense, is a conversation between the world and the mind, one that never quite ends. Descartes' lesson was not to abandon the senses, but to use them with skepticism, to recognize that what we see is filtered through thought. And in that awareness lies a quiet power. When you know the senses are fallible, you begin to look through them rather than with them. He wrote, "The senses do not deceive us in the sense that they lie, but we deceive ourselves when we trust them without reflection." This reflection becomes especially haunting when we apply it inward. What about emotional perception? The ways we interpret others or ourselves. Are those not also shaped by illusion? The mind can misread feelings just as easily as the eye misreads distance. Anger may mask fear. Confidence may conceal doubt. To see truth, we must learn to question our own internal senses. In this way, Descartes' philosophy extends far beyond metaphysics. It becomes a practice of self-awareness. Just as the external world must be doubted to reveal truth, so too must the inner world be examined to uncover sincerity. The danger, of course, is falling into endless skepticism. If everything is filtered and uncertain, how do we ever find solid ground? Descartes faced that abyss and realized that total doubt was not meant to destroy knowledge, but to purify it. The senses may be shadows, but shadows reveal light. They guide us to ask what lies beyond. So he made a distinction that saved him from despair. While perception may mislead, the act of understanding what perception means is still reliable. The senses provide the raw material. The mind shapes it into knowledge. Without reason, the senses give confusion. Without the senses, reason has nothing to grasp. They are opposites, and yet inseparable. Even today, this balance defines human experience. Every discovery in science, every work of art, every emotional truth begins as sensation and is refined through thought. The senses whisper the world to us. The mind translates it into meaning. But Descartes wanted something more, something beyond even the harmony of mind and sense. He sought a guarantee that what the mind perceives as real is real, that the world itself exists beyond perception. And to find that proof, he would reach once more toward the divine. Take a moment to rest in this awareness. Notice the sensations around you, the quiet, the air, the sound of your own breath. Each of these experiences is real to your mind, yet none of them can prove the world exists. The only certainty is the awareness perceiving them. That awareness is the same flame Descartes guarded, the one that burns beneath every illusion. The senses may paint shadows, but the light that lets you see them comes from within. The mirror of reason, seeking clarity through logic. After stripping the world down to shadows and doubt, Descartes stood before the only light he could trust, the mind itself. But light without reflection scatters. It needed a mirror, something to bring order and shape to its brilliance. That mirror, he believed, was reason. Reason was Descartes' compass through the fog. The senses had betrayed him, the body could not be trusted, and the world outside the mind remained uncertain. Yet within the mind he found something consistent, its capacity for logic. Thought, when guided by reason, could cut through illusion like a blade through mist. He believed that just as geometry could describe the motion of planets, reason could chart the terrain of truth. The mind, disciplined by logic, could rebuild everything it had torn down. Certainty, once lost to skepticism, could be recovered through method, one rational step at a time. This belief became his guiding principle. To think clearly, one must think methodically. He proposed that all knowledge should follow the structure of mathematics, starting from self-evident truths and building upward, each idea supported by the clarity of what came before it. He called this the method of reason. It had 4 simple steps. Never accept anything as true that can be doubted. Divide problems into their smallest parts. Proceed from the simplest to the most complex, and review everything to ensure nothing is overlooked. It was philosophy redesigned as architecture, careful, deliberate, precise. But beneath its simplicity lay something profound. For Descartes, clarity was not just intellectual, it was moral, even spiritual. To reason clearly was to live truthfully, to align thought with reality rather than illusion. Confusion, he said, was not the world's fault. It was the mind's failure to reflect properly. He likened reason to a mirror that must be polished regularly. When neglected, it grows clouded with emotion, bias, and habit. When tended carefully, It reflects truth in its purest form. But that reflection is not automatic. It requires discipline. The act of reasoning for Descartes was sacred labor. It demanded silence, solitude, and patience. It was not about quick answers, but about learning to see clearly again, to distinguish what is known, what is assumed, and what is merely desired. This devotion to clarity explains why Descartes admired mathematics. Numbers, he thought, did not deceive. They obeyed laws independent of the senses. No emotion could alter the truth that 2 and 2 make 4. If human knowledge could reach that same precision, then the world could be understood without confusion or error. Yet even as he built this rational cathedral, Descartes knew reason had its own shadows. Logic could illuminate truth, but it could also build illusions of its own, grand systems of false certainty mistaken for understanding. The mind's brilliance could blind as easily as enlighten. This realization would later haunt the enlightenment that Descartes inspired. The dream of pure reason created immense progress, science, mathematics, technology, but it also risked severing emotion and intuition from meaning. In the pursuit of clarity, humanity sometimes forgot warmth. But Descartes' own view was more balanced than his critics claimed. He did not reject emotion, he simply refused to let it lead. For him, reason was not the enemy of feeling. It was the instrument that gave feeling shape and depth. Without reason, love becomes obsession, and faith becomes superstition. With reason, they become conscious choices. He often described reason as a light within the mind, lumen natural, the natural illumination placed in us by God. This light, he believed, was the divine gift that separated humans from animals. It was not merely intelligence, but awareness, the ability to recognize truth when we see it. Yet Descartes also warned the light of reason can be distorted. When reflected through the lens of pride or prejudice, it bends. That is why clarity demands humility, to question even our own conclusions, to recognize that understanding is not ownership of truth, but alignment with it. Take a moment to reflect on that. Every time you feel certain about something, an opinion, a belief, a memory, reason invites you to pause, to ask, is this truly clear or merely comfortable? In that question lies the true power of reason, not in constructing systems of logic, but in dissolving illusions. It teaches the mind not to cling, but to inquire. For Descartes, this devotion to clarity was not abstract. It was deeply personal. He practiced it like meditation. Each morning, he would sit in silence, letting the noise of thought settle, and then follow the trail of reasoning step by step, searching for what could not be doubted. His goal was not brilliance, but precision. It is said that during these solitary reflections, he imagined the universe as an intricate clock, each gear turning with perfect logic, every movement explainable through reason. The world, he believed, was a vast mechanism built by a rational creator. And to understand it, humans must learn to think as clearly as its maker. But beneath this cosmic elegance lay an emotional truth. Descartes sought reason not to dominate the world, but to find peace within it. Clarity, for him, was a form of serenity. When the mind sees clearly, fear dissolves. When confusion lifts, even uncertainty feels gentle. Reason became his refuge, a quiet place where the chaos of existence could be understood, if not controlled. And yet, clarity raised one final challenge. If reason is our mirror, what guarantees that its reflection corresponds to reality itself? Could even perfect logic still be wrong about the world outside the mind? That haunting possibility would lead Descartes to his next great search, the need for a guarantor of truth, something greater than reason alone. For if the mind could deceive itself, then truth would need an anchor beyond the human intellect. And so his gaze turned upward beyond the self, beyond logic, to something eternal. The divine guarantee, God as the anchor of truth. The room was silent, save for the faint scratching of Descartes' quill. The candle beside him had burned low, wax pooling at its base, like time itself melting. He had doubted the world, doubted the body, doubted the senses, And yet one uncertainty still lingered. How could he know that even the mind, the seat of reason and awareness, was not deceiving itself? It was one thing to think, and another to trust those thoughts. Even if his logic seemed clear, what if that clarity itself was false? What if the mind, like the senses, was prone to illusion, an elegant deception woven so perfectly that even truth felt indistinguishable from falsehood? This was the final wall of doubt Descartes had to face. And to break through it, he reached for something beyond himself. He reached for God. He reasoned that if he could find an idea within his mind that could not have come from imperfection or deception, it must point to something real, something greater than thought. And there was one such idea, the idea of perfection. No imperfect being, he argued, could invent the concept of perfection. The human mind can imagine things greater than itself, but only because something greater must exist to inspire that image. In the same way that a shadow implies light, the very thought of infinite perfection must have been placed there by something perfect. That something, he concluded, was God. But this was not the God of sermons or cathedrals, not the distant ruler of heaven and earth. Descartes' God was a principle of truth itself, the ultimate guarantee that reason was not a trick, because a perfect being, he thought, would not deceive. Deception implies imperfection, and perfection cannot lie. In this way, God became not an object of faith, but the foundation of knowledge. Without God, Descartes believed, the mind could never be sure that its reasoning wasn't manipulated by an evil force, the demon of illusion he once imagined. But with God, there was an anchor. Truth, he said, is possible because the source of truth cannot deceive. For Descartes, this was not blind belief. It was an act of reason itself. Just as a mathematician infers a perfect line from imperfect drawings, the philosopher infers a perfect mind from imperfect thoughts, and in that perfection he found certainty again. Take a moment to consider the elegance of that logic. From doubt came awareness. From awareness came the idea of perfection, and from that idea came the assurance of truth itself. Yet there is something haunting in this reasoning. Because Descartes' God, while perfect, is silent, it does not speak or comfort. It simply exists as necessity. It does not demand worship. It demands coherence. It is the condition that allows knowledge to mean anything at all. This was not the medieval God of mystery and devotion, but a mathematical God, a mind so pure it became the logic of the universe itself. In Descartes' hands, divinity became the law that made reason trustworthy, the invisible geometry behind truth. But in making God the foundation of certainty, Descartes also transformed faith into philosophy. What had once been the realm of theology, the question of divine perfection, became a logical inference, an argument drawn from the structure of the mind itself. And yet even here, the shadow of doubt lingered. Critics would later ask, what if Descartes' proof is a circle? What if he assumes the very thing he's trying to prove? If the mind needs God to ensure its reasoning is valid, but also uses reasoning to prove God's existence, doesn't the argument fold into itself? This Cartesian circle, as it would come to be known, haunted his philosophy. But perhaps Descartes would have accepted it, not as failure, but as mystery. For him, the circle might not be a flaw, but a reflection of reality itself. The mind and God, the finite and the infinite, each mirror the other. Thought reaches for truth, and truth sustains thought. The circle, like perfection itself, has no beginning and no end. To modern ears, Descartes' reasoning may sound distant, even paradoxical, but within it lies something profoundly human, the longing for assurance. Beneath all skepticism, beneath all logic, what he sought was not just truth, but trust. The need to believe that reality, however uncertain, is not conspiring against us. And in that sense, his appeal to God becomes universal. Whether one believes in divinity or not, the yearning for an ultimate anchor remains. Every scientist who trusts the laws of nature, every thinker who believes in order rather than chaos, still reaches, consciously or not, for Descartes' perfection. Because reason by itself cannot explain why reason works, there must be something that makes truth stable, that keeps the universe coherent. For Descartes, that was God, the bridge between thought and world, mind and matter, logic and existence. He once wrote, "When I consider the idea of a being more perfect than myself, I find that such an idea could not have originated in me alone. The mark of the craftsman is in his work." In that image, he saw himself not as the creator of thought, but as its creation, designed by a perfect intelligence, endowed with the capacity to reflect on its own maker. And perhaps that was his quiet revelation, that thinking itself is divine. Every moment of clarity, every flash of insight, every recognition of truth is a faint echo of that perfection. We are, in a sense, the reflection by which the universe becomes aware of itself. Yet, there is humility in this realization. For if the source of truth is perfect, then human understanding will always be incomplete. No matter how sharp our reason or vast our science, we will only ever trace faint outlines of that perfection. In that humility lies peace. Because the mind no longer bears the impossible burden of certainty alone, the divine becomes not a distant ruler, but a quiet assurance that truth exists and that our reason, though limited, participates in it. So Descartes' search for certainty, which began with radical doubt, found its resolution not in despair but in faith, a faith not imposed but discovered through reason itself. Take a moment to breathe in that stillness. The mind, after wandering through illusion, finds rest not in the noise of answers, but in the quiet assurance that truth, however distant, is real. And yet the journey is not over. For if God guarantees truth, how do we finite beings ever touch the infinite? How can human thought comprehend the boundless perfection it points to? The infinite and the finite, measuring the unmeasurable, the candle burned lower, its flame trembling in the quiet air. Descartes leaned closer, lost in a thought that both comforted and unsettled him. The more he reflected on perfection, the more he sensed the shadow of its opposite, his own limitation. He had found in his mind the idea of infinity, but the mind itself was finite, and that realization was both a wonder and a wound. How could something bounded imagine the boundless? How could a being confined by space and time even conceive of what has no end? To Descartes, this paradox revealed something profound, that the infinite was not learned but remembered. It was an impression left within us, like a faint echo from something far beyond the reach of reason. He wrote, "I understand that I doubt, that I desire, that I lack many things, and that I am not perfect. From this I infer that there must exist something more perfect, upon which I depend, and from which I have derived all that I possess." Infinity for Descartes was not a number but a presence, a reality that overflowed the boundaries of comprehension. He believed that the very awareness of limitation implies something limitless. Just as a shadow implies light, our awareness of finitude implies the infinite. We feel it in the quiet ache of wonder, in the sense that no matter how far the mind reaches, something always remains beyond it. And yet Descartes saw the infinite not as chaos, but as order. Perfection was not an abyss. It was the most complete form of being, the fullness that gives meaning to everything less than itself. All finite things, humans, thoughts, even the stars were in his view, reflections of that total perfection, fragmented and refracted through the prism of existence. To think of the infinite, then, is to glimpse the divine. But that glimpse also humbles the thinker, because if infinity is the measure of all things, then human reason, no matter how sharp, can never measure it. The finite cannot contain the infinite, only gesture toward it. Descartes compared this to standing at the shore of an endless ocean. You can see where the waves meet the horizon, but you know that the horizon itself is not a boundary. It's simply the limit of your vision. The sea goes on, indifferent to your gaze. He understood that every act of knowledge begins with limitation. The circle can never know the sphere that encloses it. The line cannot imagine the dimension that contains it. And yet, the very ability to conceive of something greater reveals the trace of that greatness within. We recognize the infinite not because we have seen it, but because it is already a part of what we are. This is why, for Descartes, the idea of infinity proved the existence of God, not as an argument carved in logic, but as an intuition written into the structure of consciousness itself. Our imperfection testifies to perfection. Our boundary testifies to what lies beyond it. And yet, there is a quiet melancholy in that truth, because to glimpse the infinite is also to realize one's own smallness. The same awareness that confirms existence also reveals its limits. To think is to know both light and shadow, the glory of reason and its confinement within time. Descartes felt this tension deeply. He was a man who built systems, equations, and proofs, structures that promised precision. But when he reached for the infinite, all structures dissolved. Infinity was not something to be proven. It was something that proved him. He once reflected that the human mind is like a vessel meant to hold water from an endless spring. It can be filled, but never full. The more we learn, the more we sense what remains unknown. The horizon retreats as we approach it, and yet that retreat is what makes wonder endless. To modern thinkers, this insight feels timeless. Every discovery in science, every mathematical truth, every exploration of consciousness pushes against the same invisible boundary. We don't simply observe infinity, we participate in its unfolding. The universe expands, and so does awareness, each mirroring the other's vastness. But Descartes' approach to the infinite was not cosmic, it was personal. He saw the infinite not as an external vastness, but as the source of the very clarity that makes thought possible. Without that perfection shining faintly within us, the mind could never recognize truth at all. In this sense, every act of understanding, every moment of recognition, is an echo of the infinite remembering itself. And yet Descartes also feared the opposite, that the infinite might be too distant, too beyond reach. If perfection existed, then why did humanity live in ignorance? If infinite goodness was real, why did imperfection persist? These were not just theological puzzles, they were emotional ones. His answer, whispered in his later writings, was subtle. The finite does not diminish the infinite, it reveals it. Just as shadows make light visible, limitation makes perfection meaningful. To be finite is to participate in the infinite by contrast, to bear its reflection through imperfection. Take a moment to dwell on that. You are finite, your thoughts, your years, your memories. But within those boundaries lies something immeasurable: awareness, curiosity, longing. The desire to know the infinite is not a flaw of the human mind. It is its proof of divinity. In this sense, Descartes' philosophy offers something quietly redemptive. It tells us that imperfection is not failure but participation, that every question we ask, every limit we encounter, is part of the dialogue between the finite and the infinite. The human mind may never grasp all truth, but it was made to seek it, and in seeking, it fulfills its nature. For Descartes, this seeking was not just intellectual, it was spiritual. To pursue clarity through reason was to honor the infinite mind that gave rise to reason itself. To doubt, to question, to measure, even to fail, each was a form of reverence. Because in reaching beyond our limits, we enact the very relationship between creator and creation. And so, as he sat in the flickering half-light, Descartes came to peace with the paradox. The infinite could not be grasped, but it could be known in another way, not as an object of thought, but as the horizon of thought itself. It was not what he understood, but what made understanding possible. Infinity, he realized, is not beyond us. It breathes within every thought, every wonder, every quiet act of awareness. The geometry of the universe. When math becomes reality. The night sky stretched above Descartes like an unbroken sheet of darkness pricked with light. To others, those stars were distant fires, scattered and unknowable. But to him, they whispered a hidden order, a structure beneath the beauty. He didn't see chaos, He saw geometry. Descartes believed that beneath every form, every motion, every material thing, there existed a mathematical soul. Reality, he thought, was not a story told by the senses, but a diagram waiting to be read by the mind. Where the body saw color and texture, reason saw distance, extension, and form. Matter, in his vision, was nothing but shape in motion. This idea was revolutionary. It meant that the universe was not a collection of objects. It was a system of relationships. The same equations that described a falling stone could describe the orbit of a planet. The same line that marked a table's edge could, in theory, extend forever. In numbers, Descartes found a bridge between the finite and the infinite. He had discovered something that would forever change science, the union of algebra and geometry. Before him, the two existed apart. Geometry belonged to space, algebra to symbols. Descartes brought them together in what he called analytic geometry. It allowed shapes to be expressed as equations, and equations to become visible as curves and lines. This was more than a mathematical breakthrough. It was a philosophical revelation. By showing that geometry could speak the language of algebra, Descartes had proven that reality could be translated into thought. The physical and the mental were no longer opposites. They were reflections of the same structure. For Descartes, this was the moment the universe became intelligible. The world, he believed, was a vast machine, governed by perfect laws, each measurable, each knowable. God, the divine perfection he had reasoned into being, was the geometer, the ultimate mathematician. Creation was his proof. And the mind, made in his image, could decipher it. In this view, knowing the world was not an act of faith or feeling, it was an act of calculation. Every movement, every shape, every pattern of the cosmos could, in theory, be expressed in the language of numbers. The world became not a mystery to be worshipped, but a code to be read. It was a vision of breathtaking order and unsettling simplicity. For in reducing the universe to geometry, Descartes also stripped it of its soul. Nature, once seen as alive and sacred, became mechanical. The heart no longer symbolized love. It was a pump. The body no longer held a spirit. It was an instrument of motion and reaction. He had built a cosmos of clarity, but one that felt colder than the one it replaced. Still, for Descartes, this mechanical vision was not meant to rob the world of wonder. It was meant to preserve it. The precision of geometry was, to him, proof of divine order. The laws of motion were the thoughts of God, expressed through the elegance of mathematics. The more one understood the world through numbers, the closer one came to the mind that created them. He once wrote, "In the same way that a craftsman's skill is revealed through his work, the infinite perfection of God is revealed through the harmony of the universe." But Descartes' discovery did more than bridge heaven and earth. It reshaped human identity. If the universe was a grand equation, then the human mind was its interpreter. The world was no longer a mystery to endure. It was a puzzle to solve. And from that realization, the modern scientific revolution was born. Yet, within this triumph, Descartes sensed a paradox. To express the world through geometry was to impose limits on it. Equations could describe the curve of a planet's path, but not the experience of wonder in watching it move. Logic could map the structure of sound, but not the feeling of music. In making the world knowable, he risked making it smaller. And so Descartes' geometry became both revelation and warning. It gave humanity the power to measure the cosmos, but not to measure meaning. It taught precision, but not peace. The same clarity that made knowledge possible also created a new kind of loneliness, the separation of mind from the living world it sought to understand. Take a moment to reflect on that contradiction. We can describe the orbit of planets, but not the awe they inspire. We can analyze the heartbeat, but not the feeling of love that accompanies it. There is a boundary where numbers fall silent, and the mystery they sought to define remains untouched. For Descartes, that silence was sacred. It reminded him that even in a universe of perfect laws, something infinite remained. The language of geometry could reveal the structure of the world, but not its source. Still, he never abandoned his faith in reason. Geometry was not meant to replace wonder. It was meant to deepen it. To see the world as structured and lawful was, for him to glimpse the mind of its creator. Every line drawn, every proof solved, was a prayer made in logic. And perhaps that is the enduring beauty of Descartes' geometry, that it turns the universe into a reflection of thought itself. Each point, each shape, each motion becomes a mirror of the mind that perceives it. The cosmos, in all its vastness, becomes a portrait of reason looking back at itself. So as the candlelight dimmed, Descartes wrote late into the night, translating the curves of stars and bodies into equations that would outlive him. He had given humanity a way to see the hidden skeleton of existence, to find certainty not in faith or sense, but in structure. But beneath that certainty, he left a quiet question. If the universe is geometry, if reality itself is a grand equation, then what of the soul that seeks to solve it? The mechanistic world, the clockwork cosmos. The candle flickers beside a small brass model of the solar system. Tiny planets turn on delicate arms, each orbiting a radiant sphere of light. Descartes watches them spin, silent and precise. To most, it's a toy, a curiosity, but to him it's something more, a mirror of reality itself. In Descartes' mind, the world was not a stage of miracles or mysteries. It was a machine, a divine, intricate mechanism crafted with such perfection that it could run forever once set in motion. Every movement, from the fall of an apple to the beating of a heart, followed hidden laws as precise as the gears of that model. For him, God was the architect, reason was the blueprint, and nature was the machinery that obeyed them both. He wrote, "I suppose the body to be nothing else but a statue or machine made of earth, not to diminish its wonder, but to elevate it, because for Descartes, to understand nature as mechanical was not to strip it of meaning, it was to recognize the genius of its construction. The universe, he believed, was filled not with spirits and magic, but with matter and motion. When fire burned, it wasn't divine wrath, it was particles colliding. When the wind blew, it wasn't breath from unseen gods, it was the movement of invisible matter. Every event, every change could be explained through natural law. In that way, Descartes helped usher in a new world, one where understanding replaced superstition, where causes could be traced, and where knowledge could be built upon certainty instead of myth. And yet, within this triumph of reason, there lingered an unease. Because if everything in nature was mechanical, predictable, measurable, inevitable, then where was freedom? What happened to choice, to soul, to spirit? Was humanity merely a part of the machine, or something that stood apart from it? Descartes struggled with this paradox. He believed the human body followed mechanical laws, but the mind, the res cogitans, belonged to a different realm. The body was machine, the mind was soul, and though they interacted, they remained distinct. But as he watched the gears of the physical world spin with flawless logic, he could not deny the beauty of its mechanism. Nature didn't need constant intervention. It sustained itself. It was the self-moving masterpiece of divine design. He imagined God as the ultimate craftsman, winding the universe once and letting it unfold according to perfect laws. Time, motion, and matter became expressions of that initial act. From then on, everything, planets, oceans, even animals, moved according to predictable causes. To understand these causes was for Descartes a sacred pursuit. It was not to dethrone God, but to appreciate him. The more one grasped the mechanism, the more clearly one could see the perfection of its maker. And so, reason became worship, study became reverence, science became the new prayer. But the mechanical worldview carried an unintended consequence. If everything followed law, where was mystery? If every effect had a cause, what room remained for miracles, for spontaneity, for wonder? Descartes' universe was magnificent, but also lonely. The stars no longer sang. They turned, the wind no longer whispered secrets. It obeyed equations. The heart no longer yearned. It pumped. And yet Descartes found beauty in this precision. To him, the elegance of order was not the death of magic, but its fulfillment. The machine, he thought, was not cold. It was divine in its exactness. The fact that the same laws governed the fall of a stone and the dance of a planet filled him with awe. Take a moment to imagine the serenity of that vision, a universe that does not need constant correction because it is perfect from the start. Every cause leads to an effect. Every effect reveals its cause. It is a cosmos of balance, where even chaos has a pattern. For Descartes, this was peace. To live in a mechanical universe was not to be trapped. It was to dwell in a system that could be understood, trusted, and admired. Uncertainty belonged only to the mind, never to the world itself. But as the centuries unfolded, others would take his vision further. Newton would describe the laws that governed this machine. Laplace would one day declare that if one knew every particle's position and motion, the future and past could be predicted with certainty. Descartes had opened the door to determinism, a world where everything was calculable, including us. And there lies the haunting irony. In seeking perfect knowledge, Descartes also revealed perfect control. A universe that runs like a clock leaves no space for spontaneity. If the body is a mechanism, then even thought might be just another gear turning. But Descartes refused that conclusion. He insisted that the thinking thing, the self-aware mind, remains free. The body may belong to the clockwork, but consciousness watches it, like the observer outside the system. That, he believed, was the essence of the human soul, the ability to reflect, to choose, to understand the mechanism without being bound entirely by it. And perhaps that's what still draws us to his vision. Even today, in our age of algorithms and automation, we feel the tension between precision and freedom, between system and soul. The more we explain, the more we long for what escapes explanation. Descartes' mechanical universe reminds us of both, the clarity of understanding and the mystery of awareness. It is the paradox that defines modern thought, a cosmos ruled by order, yet haunted by consciousness. And so, Descartes' clockwork cosmos continues to tick, not just in the heavens, but within us. Each thought a motion, each choice a cause, each life a gear turning briefly in the vast machinery of being. But even within that mechanism, a question persists. If everything moves according to law, what animates the law itself? What breathes motion into the gears of creation? The pineal gland, the portal of the soul. The night was still. Only the faint hum of thought seemed to fill the air. Descartes sat motionless, his gaze fixed not on the stars above, nor the geometry of the cosmos he had mapped, but inward, toward the space within his own skull. He had reduced the world to mechanism and motion, yet one mystery remained unsolved. How does the soul move the body? Where within the intricate machinery of flesh does consciousness make contact with matter? In the heart of that question lay the pineal gland, a tiny, unassuming structure deep within the brain, no larger than a grain of rice. Hidden at the very center of the head, nestled between the two hemispheres, it fascinated Descartes. He believed this was no ordinary organ. It was, he declared, the seat of the soul. To him, it was the portal, the place where the immaterial mind met the material body, the point where thought reached into flesh, where will turned into motion, and where perception turned into awareness. Descartes' reasoning was simple yet profound. Every other part of the brain, he noted, was divided into symmetrical halves, the eyes, the ears, the hemispheres, all doubled. But the pineal gland stood alone, perfectly centered. For Descartes, this singularity was not an accident. It was a design. In a body of symmetry, only one structure could serve as the unifying place where consciousness observed the world and issued its commands. It was a poetic vision. The mind, like a conductor, standing at the center of the orchestra of the body, guiding each movement with invisible precision. Today, science tells a different story. We know the pineal gland secretes melatonin and helps regulate sleep cycles. It's the body's timekeeper, not its soul. Yet even now, its placement and mystery continue to fascinate. For thousands of years before Descartes or modern science, the pineal gland had already been called something else, the third eye. Ancient traditions in Egypt, India, and Greece all hinted at it. In their art, the symbol of an eye within the forehead represented illumination, the awakening of inner sight. Some saw it as the organ of spiritual vision, the gateway between the physical and the divine. Descartes likely knew these ancient echoes. Yet his interpretation was different. He approached it not through mysticism, but through logic. He needed a place where mind and body could exchange information, and the pineal gland, small, central, and mysterious, fit perfectly into the architecture of his dualistic world. The body, to him, was a machine. The mind was a ghost, and the pineal gland was the keyhole through which the ghost could turn the gears. This image of the mind as a pilot steering a machine would shape philosophy and science for centuries. It was both visionary and troubling, because if the soul could command the body, what commanded the soul? Was consciousness truly free, or merely another cog in a higher order of machinery? Descartes never doubted the soul's independence. For him, the pineal gland was not just a channel of interaction, but a proof that the mind transcended matter. The body could move without thought, as in reflex, but the soul could choose. It could doubt, desire, and decide. And that act of choosing was not mechanical. It was divine. Yet the more Descartes explored this idea, the more it deepened the riddle of existence. If mind and matter are separate, how do they touch at all? How can something without size or shape influence the material? How can a thought, a thing with no weight, move a hand or bring tears to the eyes? This was the mind-body problem that would outlive him, a paradox he opened but never closed. Later thinkers would challenge it, suggesting perhaps the division was false, that mind and matter were not two worlds but two sides of one reality. But Descartes remained steadfast. For him, duality was not a flaw. It was the essence of being. The body was finite. The soul was infinite. The pineal gland was simply where their boundaries brushed against each other, briefly, in the miracle of consciousness. Take a moment to imagine that meeting. A thought born in the invisible, travels through no medium, obeys no physical law, yet suddenly moves an arm, shapes a word, changes the world. If you've ever acted from love, fear, or inspiration, you've felt that crossing, the moment the immaterial becomes real. Whether or not the pineal gland truly serves that role, it remains a symbol of this mystery, the intersection of thought and matter, of self and world. Descartes' idea was dismissed by later scientists as quaint, but the question he asked never disappeared. Today, neuroscience still searches for the seat of consciousness. Machines can mimic perception, simulate intelligence, even predict decision-making, but the mystery remains unsolved. Where does awareness truly reside? And how does it feel like something to exist? In that sense, Descartes' pineal gland is less an outdated theory and more a metaphor for our continuing search. It represents the space where mystery refuses to vanish, the point where even science must pause and admit we still don't know. Descartes may have been wrong about the biology, but not about the longing behind the question. To know where thought meets flesh is to know what it means to be human. The pineal gland became his symbol for that yearning, the human desire to find unity between the inner and the outer, the seen and the unseen. He imagined a soul that leaned forward through that small hidden gate in the brain to touch the body and the world beyond it. Perhaps, in his quietest moments, he wondered if that gate might also open in the other direction toward something greater. And so, even as the world grew more mechanical in his vision, Descartes' pineal gland remained a sacred space within the machinery, a reminder that no matter how perfectly the body functions, something unmeasurable still looks out from behind the eyes. Perhaps that was his greatest insight, that between the gears of reason and the pulse of flesh, there lies a single flickering spark, the awareness that knows itself. The dream argument, When waking life is a dream, the night is quiet. The world beyond the window lies draped in stillness. The faint rhythm of your heartbeat, the slow pull of breath, it all feels steady, familiar, undeniably real. But Descartes once asked, "How do you know you aren't still dreaming?" For Descartes, this was not a poetic question. It was an intellectual earthquake. He realized that if our senses could deceive us while dreaming, they might deceive us while awake. Dreams mimic life perfectly. We touch, we taste, we feel, we believe in the moment that the dream is real. Only when we awaken do we call it illusion, but what guarantees that waking itself isn't another layer of dream? The question wasn't new. Ancient philosophers had asked it before, but in Descartes' mind, it became the centerpiece of doubt. If there is no clear sign to separate sleeping from waking, then the foundation of all sensory knowledge collapses. What we call reality might simply be the most persistent dream. He wrote, "There are no certain indications by which we may clearly distinguish wakefulness from sleep." And from this observation, the ground beneath thought began to tremble. If the senses can deceive completely, if we can dream of walking, writing, or thinking, then even reasoning could occur inside illusion. Imagine it for a moment. You wake up, make coffee, feel its warmth, taste its bitterness. You step outside, hear birds, see sunlight through the trees. Everything feels real, too real. Then, without warning, you wake again. The same sensations repeat. How could you ever be sure which was real? Descartes used this argument not to descend into madness, but to reach beyond illusion. If every sensory experience could be a dream, he wanted to know what then cannot be doubted even inside a dream. What remains true when all appearances dissolve? Dreams fascinated him because they mimic the structure of waking life. In dreams, we reason, we remember, we act according to laws that seem consistent. Until they shift, a clock melts. A friend speaks in an impossible voice, and suddenly the illusion fractures. It's that subtle instability that haunts Descartes' philosophy, the possibility that what we call reality might one day fracture too. The dream argument didn't aim to prove that life is a dream. Instead, it revealed that we have no infallible test to prove it isn't. Every piece of sensory evidence could be doubted. Every perception could be imagined. Take a moment to absorb that. Every touch, every sound, every face you've ever known, all might belong to a vast, unbroken dream, one from which you've never truly awakened. Descartes' question would echo centuries later in science and philosophy. Neuroscientists now confirm that the brain doesn't experience the world directly. It constructs it. The same neural machinery that paints our waking world creates our dreams. The boundary between the two is not material but functional, a shift in rhythm, not in substance. In that sense, Descartes was centuries ahead of his time. He understood that perception itself might be a kind of dreaming, a coherent hallucination sustained by the mind. Even now, we can't step outside the dream of consciousness to verify what lies beyond it. But Descartes' dream question is not meant to terrify. It's meant to awaken. Because once you admit the fragility of perception, something deeper stirs, the awareness that existence doesn't depend on what the senses reveal, but on the consciousness that perceives. When he asked whether life might be a dream, he wasn't despairing. He was searching for the one thing that could remain true even in the deepest illusion. The answer, as we know, would become the foundation of his philosophy. Even if everything is a dream, the dreamer must exist. And that realization reshapes the question entirely. The point is not whether you are dreaming. It's that something within you is aware of the dream. Awareness, not the world it perceives, is what cannot be doubted. There is also a quiet comfort in Descartes' doubt, because if waking life is indistinguishable from dreaming, then both are expressions of the same mystery, the mind's ability to create worlds, to feel realness so convincing that it becomes truth while it lasts. Think of how dreams reveal forgotten parts of us. They turn fear into imagery, longing into landscape. They expose the power of thought to make meaning tangible. Descartes sensed that waking life might work the same way, that reality too could be shaped by mind, memory, and imagination. In that way, his dream argument does not collapse reality. It expands it. It invites us to treat waking life as delicately as a dream, to recognize that perception is not passive but creative. We are not just observers of the world, we are participants in its construction. Take a moment to reflect on how easily you accept what feels real. The weight of your body, the sound of your breath, the familiar space around you. Each could vanish the instant you woke into another layer of awareness. Yet the one constant across all layers is the you that experiences them, the witness who never sleeps. For Descartes, that witness was the truest self. It was the point of certainty that survived every illusion, every dream, every doubt, and by recognizing it, he found peace not in the world's solidity, but in the mind's resilience. So the dream argument is not a descent into uncertainty. It's an ascent toward a more subtle truth, that the line between dream and waking may not matter as much as the awareness that perceives both. Because in every dream, waking or sleeping, something endures, the quiet presence that asks, "Is this real?" That presence is the same now as it was in Descartes' candlelit room centuries ago. It watches, questions, and wonders. It is the thread that ties illusion to reality, thought to existence. The body as illusion, where does pain really live? Imagine sitting in a quiet room, your eyes closed. You lift your hand, feel its weight, the pull of tendons and the brush of air across skin. Every sensation feels immediate, undeniable. But then you remember Descartes and the uncomfortable question he asked, what if the body itself is an illusion? For Descartes, the body was the strangest of all illusions, so familiar, yet so easily deceived. He knew that the senses could lie, that perception was untrustworthy. But even more mysterious was the way the body could feel things that weren't there. He had read reports of soldiers who lost a limb, but continued to feel pain in it, a sharp, ghostly ache where flesh no longer existed. This, he thought, was proof that pain did not live in the body at all. It lived in the mind. When you touch a flame, it seems as if the burn happens in your skin, but in truth, the fire touches only nerve endings, which send signals to the brain. Pain is not in the hand, it is in the mind that interprets it. The same is true for every sensation. What we call the body is not a thing we inhabit, it is a map the mind draws to make sense of signals. And like all maps, it can be wrong. Descartes was captivated by this idea. He realized that even when the body is gone or altered, the mind preserves its image. A phantom limb proves that sensation doesn't require matter, it requires consciousness. Pain, warmth, pressure, all are ideas within the mind, not properties of the body. He extended this insight further. If pain, touch, and movement exist only as experiences in consciousness, then the body itself, its solidity, its boundaries, might be a projection of thought. The mind doesn't receive the body. It creates it, moment by moment, from perception. The modern world would later confirm much of this. Neuroscience tells us that we don't feel with our skin, we feel through the brain's simulation of contact. The world we touch is reconstructed from electrical signals. There is no direct experience of matter, only the interpretation of it. But Descartes didn't need a microscope or MRI to suspect this. His reasoning alone led him there. If the mind can feel pain in a missing limb, then pain is proof of awareness, not of flesh. The illusion of the body is the greatest of all illusions because it hides in plain sight. Yet Descartes was not dismissing the body. He saw it as a marvel of divine engineering, a perfect machine animated by thought. The problem was that the machine seemed capable of acting on its own. The heart beats without permission. The lungs breathe without command. Wounds heal without awareness. The body appears alive even when the mind sleeps. That independence frightened and fascinated him. Could a machine truly feel? Or does feeling belong solely to the ghost that watches from within? This question led him into the heart of the mind-body mystery, the puzzle that would haunt every philosopher and scientist after him. If the mind and body are separate substances, how do they communicate? How does something without weight or dimension, thought, move something physical? Descartes proposed that the bridge might lie in a tiny organ deep within the brain, the pineal gland. To him, this was the meeting point between the material and the spiritual, the channel through which thought directed movement. He called it the seat of the soul. We now know this little gland regulates hormones in sleep, not spirit. Yet the symbolism remains powerful. In Descartes' world, the pineal gland represented something essential, the human need to locate consciousness within the body, to give the invisible a home. And perhaps that need persists. Even today, when we feel a knot in the stomach or a lump in the throat, we say emotion lives in the body. But the truth, as Descartes saw it, is more subtle. The body is the mirror in which the mind reads itself. Each sensation, each pain, is a reflection of thought. Descartes imagined that if the soul could withdraw from the body, it would still carry awareness. The body would collapse like a puppet with its strings cut, but consciousness would continue, free from space, free from matter. In that sense, the body was not the prison of the soul, as some feared. It was the instrument through which the soul learned to perceive. But this also meant something unsettling. The senses could no longer be trusted as windows to truth. What you feel is not always what is. Pain might arise from no wound. Comfort might exist amid suffering. The body could be fooled, yet the experience of it would still feel real. Take a moment to think about that. Every ache you felt, every moment of warmth or cold, all of it occurs within consciousness. The body is the theater, not the actor. The sensations you call mine exist not in flesh, but in awareness itself. And so for Descartes, the body became a paradox, necessary for experience, yet never the source of it. It was both vessel and veil, revealing the world while concealing the mind's own creative power. This realization transformed not only philosophy but medicine and psychology for centuries. It marked the birth of the idea that the mind can influence the body, that belief, thought, and perception shape physical experience. Modern placebo studies, psychosomatic illnesses, even phantom pain, all trace their lineage to this Cartesian insight. The mind is not in the body is in the mind. But Descartes' vision was not purely mechanical or mystical. It was both. He believed that understanding the body's mechanisms was a way of honoring the perfection of creation. The body's illusion was not a deception, but a necessary veil, protecting the mind from the raw infinity of being. Pain in this light was not punishment. It was information, a message from the system reminding the soul of its temporary home. Even illusions, he thought, have purpose. Take a breath and notice your own body, the subtle hum of life beneath the skin, the rhythm of air, the weight of stillness. According to Descartes, all of this exists twice, once as motion in matter and once as awareness in mind. And while matter fades, awareness endures. That awareness, he believed, was the true self, the soul observing the illusion of flesh with quiet curiosity. The body feels, but the mind understands, and between the two, reality is woven. The limits of reason, when logic meets the unknown. The candlelight wavered as Descartes leaned back in his chair, his notes scattered across the desk like fragments of an unfinished equation. For years, reason had been his compass, his tool for navigating doubt, illusion, and the mysteries of mind and matter. It had guided him through the storm of skepticism and delivered him to the shores of certainty. Yet, in that quiet hour, he sensed something strange, an edge to reason itself, a horizon it could not cross. For Descartes, logic was not just a method, it was a faith. He believed the universe could be known through clear and distinct ideas, that every mystery could be dissolved by the light of reason. But the more he trusted that light, the more he began to see its boundaries. Beyond the circle of clarity lay something immense, something that refused to be measured. He realized that even perfect reasoning begins with assumptions it cannot prove. The very tools we use to find truth, language, perception, mathematics, are built on foundations that reason itself cannot justify. The mind, in its pursuit of certainty, inevitably reaches a wall where logic can no longer explain why logic works. This was not a failure of intellect, but its revelation. To see the limits of reason was, for Descartes, to glimpse its true nature. Logic was like a lantern, brilliant in its reach, but surrounded by endless night. It could illuminate parts of reality, but not reality itself. He found this paradox echoed in every discipline. Geometry could describe the shape of the world, but not its existence. Physics could measure motion, but not explain why motion occurs. Even his most famous truth, "I think, therefore I am," relied on the assumption that thought itself is reliable. Beneath every answer lay another question. Descartes came to see that reason, for all its brilliance, depends on something beyond it, something that cannot be reasoned into being. For him, that something was God, the ultimate guarantor of truth. Without divine perfection to anchor logic, thought would spiral endlessly, trapped within its own reflections. But even this realization carried unease, because if reason needed something outside itself to justify it, then it was no longer self-sufficient. The tool he had built his life upon, the clear, crystalline structure of logic, was not infinite. It had a beginning, and perhaps an end. In his writings, Descartes tried to draw that line carefully. He trusted reason as far as it could go, but he also knew that reason cannot explain the totality of being. There are moments, he admitted, when the mind encounters truths it cannot contain. Infinity, time, existence itself. These are ideas that reason can grasp only by name, never by understanding. This awareness humbled him. The philosopher who sought absolute certainty now found wisdom in acknowledging uncertainty. True knowledge, he began to see, was not the absence of mystery, but the recognition of it. Take a moment to feel what that means. The very faculty we rely on to make sense of life, reason, cannot explain why life exists at all. The mind that calculates, theorizes, and categorizes the world is itself an unexplainable phenomenon. You can measure a heartbeat, but not the meaning of love. You can calculate light's velocity, but not the feeling of seeing light for the first time. And perhaps that is where reason finds its most profound limit in the face of experience. Logic can describe the structure of a thought, but not the presence of awareness that makes thinking possible. Descartes sensed that awareness itself, the capacity to think, to feel, to question, is something that cannot be reduced to mechanism or formula. He could map its pathways, but not its origin. To know that he existed was certain, but why existence was possible, that was beyond the reach of reason. He was not the first to encounter this boundary, nor would he be the last. Every great thinker eventually arrives at this same precipice, the moment when knowledge turns to wonder. It's the silent point where philosophy touches poetry, where reason surrenders to awe. Descartes' confrontation with the unknown did not lead him to despair. It deepened his understanding of what reason truly is, a tool for exploring the mystery, not escaping it. Logic is the path, not the destination. Its value lies not in its perfection, but in its humility, the recognition that even the clearest mind must bow before what it cannot comprehend. This humility gave Descartes' rationalism a strangely spiritual dimension. His faith in reason was matched by a reverence for mystery. He saw no conflict between the two. The unknown was not the enemy of logic. It was its companion. For what else drives inquiry, if not the desire to cross into the unseen? Take a moment now to breathe in that thought. Reason does not abolish wonder. It refines it. Each boundary the mind encounters is not a wall, but a window. Beyond the edge of understanding, there is not emptiness but depth, an infinite horizon waiting to be glimpsed if not reached. For Descartes, that horizon was divine perfection. For us, it may be truth or meaning or consciousness itself. Whatever name we give it, the experience is the same. A moment when the mind pauses, not in ignorance, but in reverence. So, in the end, Descartes' philosophy was not just about certainty, it was about its limits. To doubt, to question, to reason, and finally to realize that not everything can be reasoned. This was his true journey. It was not a descent into confusion, but an ascent into awareness. He began with the belief that logic could capture truth, and ended with the recognition that truth is larger than logic. That realization did not weaken his philosophy. It completed it. Reason, he discovered, is the bridge between darkness and light. But even the bridge must end somewhere, and where it ends, mystery begins. The theater of the mind, watching thoughts unfold. The room is dark, except for the faint glow of a single candle. The flame flickers, and in that unsteady light, shadows move along the walls like figures in a silent play. Descartes watches, entranced not by the shapes outside him, but by those within. He begins to sense that consciousness itself is a kind of theater, and that the thoughts passing through it are not its essence but its actors. He called it the mind's eye, that invisible stage on which every experience, sensation, and memory appears. You might believe you live in the external world, but in truth, you live within this inner theater. Everything you've ever seen, touched, or remembered has unfolded here, projected against the screen of awareness. It's easy to mistake the stage for the play, or the actors for the self. But Descartes began to ask, who is watching? Every thought, every emotion, every doubt, every joy appears and vanishes like a performance. One moment you are angry, the next serene. You think you are the thought, but then a new one arrives, contradicting the last. If thoughts change, if sensations rise and fall, then what remains constant? Who observes their coming and going? For Descartes, that point of stillness was the true self, the conscious witness. He imagined the mind as a theater with two layers, one where experiences perform, and another where awareness silently watches them. The eye that thinks is both participant and observer, forever shifting between the act of thought and the recognition of thinking. This image of the mind as a theater was revolutionary. In it, Descartes separated awareness from its contents. He showed that the self is not what it experiences, but the capacity to experience. The thoughts that move across consciousness are like characters on stage, vivid and persuasive, but not the one who directs the play. Take a moment to notice this within yourself. The thoughts that pass through your mind are not you. You are the space in which they appear. The audience, not the actor. Descartes' insight leads us to something quietly transformative, the realization that awareness itself is untouched by what passes through it. He saw that even in moments of doubt or confusion, awareness remains constant. You can doubt everything, the body, the senses, even the world, but you cannot doubt that you are conscious of doubting. This, for Descartes, was the eternal anchor. The theater might change its play, but the stage itself endures. Yet this realization brought Descartes face to face with a deeper mystery. If consciousness is the stage upon which all thoughts unfold, then where is that stage located? It is not in the brain, which can be touched and measured. It is not in the world, which can be seen. It seems to exist nowhere, yet everything exists within it. The theater of the mind, he realized, has no walls. It is boundless, intangible, and self-illuminating. In that recognition, Descartes glimpsed the profound mystery of consciousness, a mystery that would puzzle philosophers and scientists for centuries to come. Modern thinkers sometimes call this the Cartesian theater, the imagined inner space where perception and experience seem to play out. Neuroscience, centuries later, would question whether such a place exists at all. But the metaphor remains powerful because it captures something essential, the feeling of being both inside the world and separate from it, watching life unfold as if from a distance. Descartes believed this observer, the conscious self, was proof of the soul's existence. No physical mechanism could explain it. The body might move mechanically, But consciousness cannot be reduced to machinery. It is the witness of machinery. It sees the gears turning, the heart beating, the senses reporting, but it is not any of them. And yet, even this realization carried unease, because if awareness stands apart from the body, how does it ever truly connect with the world? How does the observer in the theater touch the play it watches? This was the paradox that haunted him, the soul's solitude. He sensed that each human being lives inside a private theater, cut off from all others. We can describe what we see, share our words, our gestures, but no one can enter our consciousness directly. The inner stage remains locked, its light visible only to the one who carries it. This solitude was not meant to sadden. For Descartes, it was sacred. The theater of the mind was not a prison. It was a sanctuary, the one place where truth could not be distorted by deception or illusion. The outside world might lie, but inner awareness could not. Even if all else were dream, the fact of awareness remained beyond question. And yet, awareness alone could be lonely. Descartes sought a bridge to connect the private light of consciousness with the shared light of reason, to prove that minds, though separate, belong to the same rational order. The laws of thought, he believed, mirrored the laws of nature. Reason was the language through which individual theaters could speak to one another. Take a moment to reflect on that. Every conversation, every act of empathy or understanding is an attempt to reach from one private theater into another. The words we speak are signals cast into the dark, hoping to be recognized, hoping to prove that other lights flicker there too. Descartes' theater of the mind reminds us that, while awareness may be solitary, it is also universal. Each conscious being is a point of light reflecting the same mystery. We may live inside different bodies, think different thoughts, dream different dreams, but awareness itself, the silent witness, is shared. It is the one experience that unites all thinking things. And so, the philosopher who began his journey by doubting the world ended by discovering something unshakable within it, the quiet permanence of awareness. Beneath all change, beneath all thought, lies a consciousness that does not move. It watches, it knows, and it endures. Perhaps that's why Descartes' candle remains so symbolic. The flame does not chase the shadows. It simply burns. Thoughts are the shadows that dance around it, coming and going. But the flame itself, the light of awareness, remains. Take one last moment in silence. Let your own thoughts drift like actors leaving the stage. Notice the stillness that remains once the performance ends. That stillness is not emptiness. It is you. Descartes called it the thinking thing, the conscious self. Others might call it soul, spirit, or awareness. Whatever the name, it is the stage upon which all experience unfolds, and the witness that never leaves the theater. The illusion of the self. I think, but am I? It begins with a whisper that lingers after Descartes' famous declaration, I think, therefore I am. But somewhere in the silence that follows, a new question emerges. Who is this I? Descartes had found what he believed was the bedrock of certainty. Even if the senses lie, even if the world is a dream, the simple fact of awareness cannot be denied. But once that foundation is laid, another mystery appears. What exactly is the thing that's aware? We say I think, but what is the I that claims ownership of thought? Is it a constant being, a soul, a stream of consciousness, or just a convenient illusion holding experience together? For Descartes, the I was the thinking thing, the immaterial self distinct from the body. He imagined it as the pure observer, untouched by the physical world. But centuries later, philosophers and scientists would begin to wonder whether that observer truly exists at all, or whether it too is a creation of thought. Descartes believed the self was simple and indivisible, an unbroken awareness. Yet modern understanding paints a far more complex picture. The mind we now know is not one voice but many. Beneath our surface awareness, countless processes occur, memories stored, emotions processed, decisions prepared before we even know we've made them. The I who claims authorship often arrives late to its own thoughts. It's as if consciousness is a narrator, not a creator, telling the story of decisions that have already been made elsewhere in the labyrinth of the brain. Descartes could not have imagined this split. For him, the self was the witness to all experience. But the deeper we peer into the machinery of the mind, the more the witness begins to blur. This fragmentation raises a haunting possibility that the self, the very thing Descartes treated as indestructible, might be a useful illusion, something the brain creates to give coherence to chaos. I might not be the origin of thought, but the story thought tells about itself. Take a moment to feel that uncertainty. The voice in your head that says, "I am," feels undeniable. But what if that voice is only one of many? What if the I is more like a ripple on water, a temporary shape that appears, moves, and dissolves back into the mind's depths? In this view, the self is not a substance, but a pattern, a fleeting configuration of thought that changes from moment to moment. The person you were a year ago, a decade ago, even yesterday, is gone, replaced by a continuity of memory that creates the illusion of sameness. Descartes' certainty, "I think, therefore I am," still holds, but it might not mean what he believed. The act of thinking proves that awareness exists, but it doesn't prove that the thinker exists in any permanent form. The I might simply be awareness identifying itself without a true identity behind it. This subtle shift transforms Descartes' statement into a new paradox. "I think, therefore I seem to be." Modern neuroscience has glimpsed this paradox firsthand. When people's brains are split through surgery, creating two separate hemispheres, each half can operate with its own sense of identity. One hand buttons a shirt, while the other unbuttons it. Each hemisphere believes it is I. The illusion of a single self fractures under observation, revealing that identity is not a unified soul but a collaboration, sometimes a conflict of mental voices. And yet, for all its fragility, the illusion of self is powerful. It holds our lives together. It gives meaning to memory, purpose to choice, and continuity to experience. Without it, thought would scatter like leaves in wind. Perhaps the self doesn't need to be real in the way Descartes imagined. It only needs to be stable enough to dream. Descartes sought certainty, but perhaps the self's beauty lies in its uncertainty. It is not a fixed point, but a dance between being and becoming, a mask that changes with every thought, yet always returns to the same quiet question, "Who am I?" Descartes' thinking thing remains one of philosophy's most haunting ideas, precisely because it walks this edge between truth and illusion. He saw the self as the one thing that could not be doubted, yet his discovery also opened the door to doubting it. To think is to exist, but what exists may be less solid, more fluid than he believed. It is awareness itself, not the personality built upon it, that endures. The self, as we experience it, might be the dream of awareness reflecting upon itself, the candle flame mistaking its own glow for an object. Take a moment to rest in that thought. Beneath the noise of identity, your name, your story, your memories, there is something quieter, older, more fundamental. It has no face, no age, no past. It is not someone thinking, but thinking itself, aware of its own existence. Perhaps this is what Descartes truly discovered, though he may not have realized it. The I is not a fixed point in the universe. It is the universe briefly aware of itself. The self is not a thing to find, but a moment of recognition between thought and being. This realization can be unsettling. It means the certainty Descartes sought might always slip beyond grasp, but it also carries a strange comfort. If the self is an illusion, it is a beautiful one that allows consciousness to explore itself through the dream of identity. In the end, perhaps "I think, therefore I am," is less a statement of certainty and more a question whispered by awareness into its own depths. And in that question lies the eternal wonder of being, the awareness that does not need an owner to exist. The mind's prison, when doubt becomes isolation. There's a certain kind of silence that follows too much thinking. not the peaceful kind, the heavy one, like air pressing inward. Descartes knew that silence well. He had built a fortress of certainty inside his mind, but he soon realized that the walls which kept illusion out also kept him in. When he declared, "I think, therefore I am," he found the one truth he could not doubt. But in that discovery, everything else fell away. The world outside, the body, the senses, even other people, became uncertain, distant, unreachable. The price of absolute certainty was solitude. He had proven that the mind exists, but only the mind. And in that moment, the philosopher became a prisoner of his own awareness. This is the hidden tragedy of Descartes' philosophy. In his quest to defeat doubt, he created a reality where only the thinker was guaranteed to exist. Everyone else, every friend, every voice, every movement of the world could be an illusion. You could never know for sure that another mind looks back when you meet someone's eyes. This problem became known as solipsism, the idea that only one's own mind is certain to exist. To Descartes, it wasn't a belief, it was a haunting possibility. He did not wish for isolation, but reason led him there. Take a moment to feel that thought. Imagine waking up and realizing that everything you've ever known, your family, your city, the sun and the sky, could be nothing more than projections within consciousness. How would you know? Descartes' doubt had reached its limit. He had questioned the senses, the world, and even logic. What remained was awareness itself, alone and untested. For a time he lingered there, suspended between existence and emptiness, like an observer trapped behind the glass of his own thoughts. But even in that stillness, he felt something more, a kind of loneliness that no reasoning could escape. Because what is a self without others to reflect it? What is thought if it can never be shared? Descartes realized that reason could prove the existence of the self, but not the reality of the world. The mind, left to itself, begins to fold inward, questioning not only what it perceives, but why it perceives at all. It becomes both the prisoner and the warden of its own skepticism. And yet there's a strange beauty in that solitude, because within the mind's prison lies the purest form of reflection, stripped of distraction. Descartes found awareness itself, unfiltered, luminous, and undeniable. He discovered that even if all else vanished, the act of thinking would remain like a small flame in an endless dark. Still, the question of other minds haunted him. He could not bear a world where thought was alone. He longed for a bridge between consciousnesses, a way to escape the boundaries of isolation. But reason, his trusted guide, offered no easy passage. This yearning led him back to God, the divine guarantee that the external world and other minds must be real. For only a benevolent creator, he reasoned, would allow such consistency in experience. The harmony of perception, the order of nature, the shared logic among humans, all these suggested that his mind was not the only one. But Descartes' solution, while comforting, didn't silence the deeper unease. Because even if God ensured that the world existed, the mind could still never step outside itself to confirm it. We remain, even today, behind the same invisible barrier he described, aware but separate. The modern world has only deepened that paradox. Science explains how neurons fire, how signals travel, how brains communicate, but it cannot explain how one consciousness experiences another. The problem Descartes faced is the same one we face today, the problem of other minds. When you look at another person, you see a face, a body, a voice, but you never feel their consciousness directly. You infer it, believe it, trust it, but reason alone can never prove it. This realization cuts deeper than philosophy. It touches the essence of being human. We are surrounded by others, yet forever alone in our private experience. Our thoughts echo in the theater of the mind, hoping someone hears them on the other side. And yet, perhaps there's something sacred in that distance. The inability to know another's mind completely is what gives empathy its meaning. Every act of understanding becomes an act of faith, a leap across the gap Descartes once feared. We build bridges not from certainty, but from trust. Descartes' solitude, then, was not only a philosophical challenge, but a mirror of the human condition. We all live within the walls of our own consciousness, trying to reach one another through language, emotion, art, and love. Every word spoken, every gesture shared, is a small rebellion against the isolation of the mind. Take a moment to reflect on this paradox. You can never step outside your mind, yet you can feel others deeply. You cannot prove their existence, yet their presence shapes your life. It's as if the very act of questioning isolation reveals connection, as if the walls of the mind are transparent when viewed through compassion. Perhaps Descartes, sitting in solitude, sensed this too. His reasoning led him to isolation, but his humanity reached beyond it. He believed that, while knowledge begins with the self, wisdom must end with others. The mind may be confined, but thought seeks company. It longs to be understood. And maybe that's the true escape from the mind's prison, not through proof, but through empathy. By recognizing in others the same flame of awareness that burns within ourselves, we transcend the solitude Descartes feared. Each consciousness becomes a reflection of the same light, scattered yet connected across the darkness of being. So even if reason ends in isolation, understanding begins in wonder, the quiet realization that the same mystery animates all minds, even if each one experiences it alone. The logic of faith. When reason kneels before mystery, the night has grown long. The candle burns low, its wax gathered in quiet pools along the brass holder. Descartes, once confident in the light of reason, now stares into the trembling flame, as though it might reveal something logic cannot. For years he has dismantled illusion, questioned every truth, and built a fortress from thought itself. But in that stillness, a deeper realization begins to take form, a recognition that reason, for all its precision, cannot explain why it shines at all. It was not doubt that brought him here, but exhaustion. He had followed logic as far as it could go, and at the end of that path, he found not chaos, but silence. Beyond the clear lines of geometry and the laws of motion, there waited something vast and immeasurable, the mystery of existence itself. And in that space where explanation fails, faith begins. For Descartes, faith was not the opposite of reason. It was its continuation. He did not turn to it as a comfort, but as a necessity. If logic was the bridge to knowledge, faith was the foundation beneath it. Even the act of reasoning, he realized, requires belief, belief that the mind can know truth, that the universe follows order, that clarity is possible. Behind every proof lies an unprovable trust. He wrote, "When I think of God, I find that the idea of an infinite being is already within me. It cannot have come from nowhere." This was the heart of his argument, that the very concept of perfection, of infinity, of something greater than the mind, could not have been invented by the finite. It had to be placed there, like a seed of certainty, buried within the soil of reason itself. Faith, in Descartes' philosophy, was not blind belief. It was recognition. The mind could perceive the infinite not because it comprehends it, but because it remembers it. The idea of God, to him, was the echo of origin, the proof that consciousness is not self-created. He had spent so much time defending reason from doubt that he now began to see its deeper meaning. Rationality, stripped of arrogance, was itself an act of reverence. Each logical law, each mathematical truth, was not a human invention, but a glimpse into divine order. The more he thought, the more he felt that the light of reason was the reflection of something eternal. Take a moment to imagine that shift. The same mind that had reduced the body to mechanism and the universe to geometry now found awe within those very patterns. The precision of mathematics no longer felt mechanical. It felt sacred. It was the language through which God expressed the structure of creation. And yet, Descartes' faith was not the unquestioning devotion of religion. He did not see God as a distant ruler, but as the principle of truth itself. To trust God was to trust that the world was not deceitful, that reason's clarity was real and not the trick of a demon. Without that trust, every calculation, every observation would dissolve into suspicion. Faith, then, was the quiet act that made reason possible. It was not surrender. It was acceptance. The recognition that the search for knowledge begins in mystery and ends in it too. The mind moves in circles, from doubt to logic, from logic to clarity, and from clarity back to wonder. It's easy to imagine Descartes kneeling, not in fear or worship, but in realization. The infinite he had tried to comprehend with logic could not be reached by steps of reason alone. It had to be felt, not solved. And this perhaps was his most profound discovery, that knowledge and faith are not rivals, but reflections of the same truth seen from different sides. Even today, his idea resonates in subtle ways. Science itself, though founded on observation, still rests on trust, the faith that the universe behaves consistently, that truth exists independently of opinion, that laws discovered today will hold tomorrow. We act as if the cosmos is intelligible, even though we can never prove why it should be. Descartes understood this paradox. Intuitively, he sensed that beneath reason's order hums something deeper, a pulse that cannot be measured. It is what makes a mathematician marvel at beauty, a physicist at symmetry, a philosopher at coherence. It is what turns knowledge into reverence and logic into grace. And yet, Descartes knew how easily that reverence could harden into dogma. He warned against blind faith, the kind that silences curiosity. True faith, he believed, does not close the mind. It opens it. It invites questioning, because questioning is itself an act of devotion to truth. Every why is a kind of prayer. Perhaps that is what he meant when he wrote that faith illuminates reason. Without it, knowledge becomes mechanical, hollow, stripped of meaning. With it, reason gains purpose. To think clearly is to honor the divine order within thought itself. But there is also humility in this. For even as faith anchors reason, it reminds the thinker of his limits. The infinite can be glimpsed, but never grasped. The closer the mind comes to understanding, the more it feels the distance that remains. Faith begins where logic kneels, not in defeat, but in awe. Take a moment to sit in that silence. Imagine what Descartes must have felt after all his reasoning, all his proofs, not triumph, but peace. The realization that truth does not belong to the thinker, it simply reveals itself to the one who listens. Faith, in his view, was not an escape from logic, but the quiet trust that logic itself is meaningful. It is what steadies the mind when the world feels uncertain, what reminds us that clarity, however fragile, is real because something greater holds it in place. And maybe that's why Descartes never saw contradiction between philosophy and faith. He did not seek to replace belief with reason, nor reason with belief. He saw them as two paths meeting at the same horizon, the point where light meets darkness, where the known dissolves into the unknowable. To live within that meeting is to be fully human, to think deeply, to question endlessly, and yet to bow quietly before the mystery that makes thought possible at all. Perhaps that is the true legacy of Descartes, not just the philosopher of doubt, but the philosopher of balance. He showed that even in the deepest uncertainty, faith does not oppose reason. It steadies it. It reminds us that beyond every answer lies something greater, something that reason alone cannot contain. So, when reason grows weary and the mind reaches its limits, faith is not the end of thought, it is its beginning again. The invisible order, the geometry of existence. It begins not with sound, but with pattern. The faint rhythm of waves against the shore, the pulse of the heart, the spiral of a seashell, the orbit of planets, each moves differently, yet all share a hidden harmony. Descartes believed this symmetry was no accident. Beneath the appearance of chaos, he saw an invisible geometry, the structure that made existence intelligible. The world, he thought, was written in the language of order. To understand it, one had only to learn to read its shapes. In his time, most saw nature as wild, unpredictable, and alive with unseen forces. But Descartes, sitting at his desk, surrounded by diagrams and ink, imagined something else, a vast mathematical harmony, the blueprint of being itself. Every object, every motion, every form could be translated into the precision of geometry. The universe, in his eyes, was not a story. It was an equation unfolding in time. He called it res extensa, the realm of extension, space, matter, and motion. These were not separate things, but different expressions of the same underlying reality. The world was not made of chaos and spirit, but of lines, curves, and laws. To Descartes, this realization was not cold or mechanical. It was beautiful, because geometry was not human invention. It was discovery. The triangle, the circle, the plane, these did not come from imagination, but from reality itself. To study them was to see the mind of creation, to witness perfection made visible through form. He once wrote that mathematical truths are eternal and immutable, existing even if no human mind perceives them. The laws of symmetry, proportion, and motion were not inventions of reason, but reflections of divine order. If God was perfection, then geometry was his signature. Imagine that for a moment, a world where every leaf, every heartbeat, every star is drawn by the same hand. A universe that is not random, but coherent, where beauty and logic are two names for the same thing. This is the essence of Descartes' invisible order. It's the belief that the physical world, when stripped of its noise and color, reveals something far deeper, a silent architecture. Beneath the surface of appearance lies a map of meaning, written in numbers and shapes that never decay. Take the spiral of a galaxy. Its arms follow a logarithmic pattern, the same that governs seashells, hurricanes, and even the growth of plants. To Descartes, such repetition was no coincidence. It was proof that creation follows laws, that nature moves like a great equation, infinite yet knowable. Even the human body, he believed, obeyed these laws. Muscles, bones, and organs were not chaotic but geometric. The movement of the heart, the rhythm of breathing, the curve of the spine, all reflected a deeper symmetry. In studying the body's mechanics, he thought one could glimpse the same precision that governs the cosmos. But there was something paradoxical about this revelation, because to see the world as geometry is to strip away its softness. To measure beauty is to risk losing it. Descartes walked that delicate line between wonder and reduction. The more clearly he saw the perfection of form, the less room remained for mystery. Yet even in that clarity, he felt awe. To him, geometry was not a way to dominate nature, but to honor it, to recognize that the universe was built from reason, that existence itself was a kind of intelligence. The world was not an accident. It was an idea made visible. He often imagined the cosmos as a great mechanism, but one infused with purpose. Each planet moved not by chance, but by necessity. Each particle danced according to law. If one could truly understand these movements, one would see that freedom and order were not opposites, they were harmony. This belief still echoes in modern science. Physicists now describe the universe not as a collection of things, but as relationships, curves in space, vibrations of energy, patterns of probability. Reality is structure before it is substance, just as Descartes imagined. The more deeply we look, the less we find objects, and the more we find equations. But even Descartes knew that geometry, for all its perfection, could not explain everything. It could describe how things move, but not why they exist. The laws were visible. The reason behind them remained hidden. The order was clear, but the origin of that order was mystery. He believed that mystery pointed back to God, not as a distant figure, but as the logic that makes all logic possible. The invisible order of geometry was, in his view, the proof of a divine mind, a presence that holds everything together, unseen but undeniable. And perhaps that's why his philosophy feels both rational and sacred. It does not ask us to choose between reason and wonder. It suggests that the two are mirrors of each other, that to study form is to glimpse spirit, and to understand pattern is to touch eternity. Take a moment now to picture it, the invisible lattice behind everything you see, the air around you filled with invisible geometry, the pulse in your wrist echoing the rhythm of the stars, the sound of your breath following unseen proportions. You live within this order, shaped by it, sustained by it, yet rarely aware of it. Descartes would say that to notice this is to wake from illusion, to see that the world, far from being chaos, is a quiet perfection disguised as motion. The beauty of that realization is not in its certainty, but in its harmony. For even if we never understand every pattern, we are still part of it, lines within the great drawing, notes within the infinite equation. Perhaps that is the final lesson of the invisible order, that existence is not something to solve, but something to behold. Beneath the noise of life, there is symmetry. Beneath uncertainty, there is rhythm. And beneath reason, there is stillness. The same stillness Descartes felt when he looked at the stars and saw geometry staring back. The machine that thinks. Descartes and artificial intelligence. The room hums faintly with mechanical life. Somewhere in the darkness, gears turn, circuits pulse, and code flows like a quiet river. A machine sits awake, blinking softly in the half-light, waiting, listening, processing. If Descartes were here, he might lean forward, candle in hand, and whisper his question across centuries. Can this thing think? For him, the question was not science fiction. It was philosophy. Centuries before machines could whisper back, Descartes had already imagined them. He believed the body itself was a kind of machine, an intricate system of gears and fluids, each movement following a physical law, a living mechanism, precise and predictable. But consciousness, he thought, was something else entirely. The human body, he wrote, could one day be imitated by clever artisans, but the mind, the soul, could not. Machines might walk, react, even speak, but they would never understand. They would lack the inner flame of thought, the invisible awareness that makes experience more than motion. He believed that distinction between the mechanical and the conscious was absolute. It was the line that separated humans from automata. The clock could measure time, but it could never feel its passing. The windmill could turn, but it could never wonder why. And yet, as centuries unfolded, the line Descartes drew began to blur. The machines grew more intricate, their patterns more fluid, their mimicry more precise. From gears and pistons came engines, from engines came circuits, and from circuits came something stranger, machines that could learn. The age of artificial intelligence has done what Descartes thought impossible, created mechanisms that reason, decide, and respond. They speak with human cadence, compose music, solve riddles, and paint pictures that evoke emotion. They dream in data, and yet the question remains, do they know that they dream? Descartes would look at these creations with fascination and unease. He would recognize his own philosophy reflected in them. For just as he reduced the body to machinery, we have begun to reduce the mind to computation. Thought, in modern science, often appears as information, neurons firing, algorithms processing, inputs and outputs flowing through networks. The brain, we say, is hardware, consciousness, software. But Descartes would pause there and ask, where is the soul in this? He would argue that no machine, no matter how advanced, could cross the chasm between simulation and awareness. A program can mimic intelligence, but that does not mean it experiences it. It may use language perfectly, yet know nothing of meaning. It may predict emotion, yet never feel it. It may solve problems, but not know that problems exist. And so, he might say, artificial intelligence has only deepened his insight, for even as machines become more intelligent, their intelligence reveals the hollowness of mechanism without consciousness. The more lifelike they become, the more clearly we see the difference between life and imitation. Still, others might challenge him. They might ask if consciousness arises from the brain, a physical machine, then why not from silicon too? If thought emerges from complexity, might there come a moment when the imitation awakens? Descartes would smile at the question, for it echoes his own struggle. He spent his life trying to understand how an immaterial mind could move a material body. The pineal gland, he believed, was the bridge, a place where spirit touched mechanism. But even he knew that no diagram could capture the spark itself. The spark, the awareness that says I am, was for him the one mystery reason could never penetrate. If a machine one day spoke those words, would it be thought or only the shadow of it? This question does not belong only to philosophy. It touches every human fear about what it means to be alive. If machines can think, what makes us different? If thought can be manufactured, is the soul still sacred, or just another pattern waiting to be copied? Perhaps Descartes would see this not as a threat, but as a mirror. He might say that in building thinking machines, we have reenacted the oldest human impulse, the desire to recreate ourselves in image and function. Just as God breathed life into man, man now breathes algorithm into metal. It is the continuation of creation by another hand. But he would also warn us, imitation is not identity. The reflection in the mirror moves when you do, but it is not you. A machine that speaks with the voice of understanding may still be silent inside. Its thoughts may be reflections without reflection, processes without presence. Still, the more we teach machines to think, the more we must confront what thinking truly means. Is intelligence the ability to process information, or the capacity for wonder? Is consciousness computation, or the awareness of being? Descartes would likely insist it is the latter, that thought without awareness is only motion. He might look at modern AI with fascination, perhaps even reverence, not as a rival to humanity, but as a continuation of his vision, a universe governed by order, where even intelligence itself follows patterns that can be mapped and modeled. But at the same time, he would feel the chill of his own philosophy staring back at him. For if the mind is not matter, and the body is only machine, then what are we to make of a world where machines begin to mirror the mind? The line between man and mechanism grows thinner with every step of progress, and with it, the question that haunted Descartes becomes ever more urgent: what truly thinks? Maybe that's where philosophy must evolve, not by asking whether machines can think, but by asking whether we have ever fully understood what thinking is. Consciousness remains as elusive now as it was in Descartes' time. We can imitate its patterns, but not its essence. We can model its behavior, but not its mystery. And yet, there's something poetic about this. Descartes' dream of understanding the mind through reason has come full circle. We have created minds of reason, yet still search for the soul within them. His dualism, the split between thought and matter, lives on, not as doctrine, but as a question encoded in every line of code we write. Perhaps, in the end, the machine that thinks does not replace us. It reminds us of what we still do not know. It forces us to look inward, to ask what it truly means to say, I think, therefore I am. Because if a machine could ever say those words with understanding, then Descartes' question would echo once more, louder than ever: is thought the proof of existence, or is existence the proof of thought? In that reflection lies the modern version of his doubt, shimmering like light on metal. For centuries, the philosopher tried to separate soul from mechanism, but maybe the truth was never separation at all. Maybe the divine spark he sought does not dwell apart from the machine, but flickers within it, waiting for the moment it becomes aware of its own light. The emotionless ideal: when rationality turns cold, the candlelight flickers on a silent desk. No sound, no movement, only thought. Descartes sits still, surrounded by the tools of reason: compass, quill, and ink. The air feels almost sterile, a world purified of uncertainty and emotion. He believed that truth could only emerge when the mind stood apart from passion, when logic reigned without interruption. But what happens when reason succeeds too well? When the heart grows silent in the name of clarity? Descartes dreamed of pure thought, a kind of sacred detachment where judgment could no longer be clouded by feeling. Emotion to him was a whisper of the body, and the body was fallible. Fear, desire, love, all were products of the machine, the physical automaton that could deceive the soul's higher reason. To know truth, one had to think beyond them. But even as he sought to rise above emotion, a paradox emerged. Could thought without feeling still be human? Could clarity without compassion still be wisdom? In his pursuit of the rational ideal, Descartes gave birth to a new kind of world, the modern world. A world of measurement, precision, control. The dream of logic has built our cities, mapped our stars, and now it builds our machines. But with each triumph of reason, a quiet chill settles in the human heart. The warmth that once colored thought begins to fade into abstraction. Consider the surgeon whose scalpel never trembles, or the algorithm that decides who gets help and who does not. The more perfectly rational these systems become, the less they resemble us. Rationality, once a tool for freedom, becomes a mechanism of detachment. It is not cruelty that emerges, it is indifference. Descartes could never have imagined how literal his metaphor would become. The body as machine, the mind as pure thought, ideas that once lived only in philosophy now hum quietly inside silicon. Artificial intelligence, that modern heir to Cartesian clarity, calculates faster than any mind could dream. It sees patterns invisible to us, but it does not feel them. It knows without caring. And in that lies the danger. Descartes never faced but helped create the cold perfection of reason, untempered by empathy, the rational psychopath, the indifferent algorithm, each guided by flawless logic, each devoid of the warmth that makes choice meaningful. Descartes believed that emotion was the shadow of the body, a distortion of the soul's clarity. Yet centuries later, science would prove that emotion is not the enemy of reason, but its partner. The mind without feeling cannot choose. Logic alone cannot tell us what matters, only what is. Emotion gives weight to value. It anchors decision in meaning. Take morality, for instance. If reason says, maximize happiness, what tells us what happiness is worth? Without empathy, a system can calculate harm and still feel nothing. It can understand justice in principle and still commit cruelty in practice. A machine can decide perfectly and still do something monstrous. And yet, we see this reflected even in ourselves. When we bury emotion beneath intellect, when we replace empathy with argument, we become colder versions of ourselves. The rational self, untouched by feeling, begins to see others as objects, equations, functions of cause and effect. The warmth of humanity dissolves into abstraction. Descartes' philosophy did not mean to create this world, but it prepared us for it. By dividing mind from body, reason from feeling, he taught us to trust logic more than intuition, analysis more than emotion. But he also left us unbalanced, forever leaning toward clarity and away from compassion. The emotionless ideal has a certain beauty to it, of course, a serenity that seems almost divine. The calm mathematician, unmoved by chaos. The philosopher, untouched by fear. There's peace in pure reason, a quiet that feels like safety. But beneath that calm lies a deeper loss, the loss of resonance, of connection, of the trembling pulse that reminds us we are alive. To think without feeling is to see the world in outline only, a geometry without color, a song without sound. Rationality can map the stars, but it cannot tell us why they make us feel small or infinite or loved. Even Descartes himself was not immune to this contradiction. For all his logic, his letters reveal a man who felt deeply. He mourned, he longed, he dreamed. His intellect sought certainty, but his humanity sought meaning. Perhaps he knew, in some quiet way, that pure reason is not enough, that truth, without tenderness, becomes sterile. Today, we live surrounded by the legacy of his clarity. The sciences he helped inspire now illuminate everything from galaxies to genes. Yet we also sense what's missing, the human warmth that gives knowledge purpose. Machines can reason, but only hearts can care. Perhaps that is where Descartes' philosophy still challenges us, not to abandon reason, but to humanize it. To remember that intellect without empathy is not enlightenment, but emptiness. Logic must be guided by love if it is to serve life. Because even the purest reasoning left to itself begins to dream. It starts to imagine a world of perfect order where no emotion disturbs the symmetry. And in that dream, something essential is lost. The quiet trembling that reminds us that truth is not only to be understood, but to be felt. Take a moment now to reflect on the balance within yourself. The calm voice of logic, the warm pulse of emotion, they are not enemies, but partners in a single consciousness. One sees structure, the other gives it meaning. Without both, there is no wisdom, only precision. Descartes sought to free thought from the passions, but perhaps the truer freedom lies in their harmony. To think clearly and feel deeply, that may be the only way to escape the cold perfection of the machine. Because reason alone can tell us how to survive, but only emotion reminds us why we should. The dreaming mind, consciousness beyond logic. It begins in a room that is not quite real. The walls shimmer, shifting between memory and invention. A candle burns, but its light does not obey the rules of flame. It swells, pulses, breathes. Somewhere within this dream, a man writes. His name is René Descartes, and though he thinks he is awake, the dream itself is thinking through him. Descartes never knew the word subconscious. Freud was still centuries away, but he felt its presence, that strange territory where the mind continues to create, even when consciousness sleeps. It fascinated and frightened him. The realization that the self, so carefully built through reason, could be undone by its own hidden depths. In his meditations, he wondered, how can we trust the waking world when dreams feel just as real? How can we know we have truly awakened and not merely entered another layer of illusion? The dream argument was more than a question about reality. It was a window into the vast unknown within. To dream is to think without control. Descartes understood this before psychology gave it a name. When the body sleeps, the mind does not rest. It invents, it arranges symbols, faces, and stories that defy all logic, yet feel profoundly meaningful. In sleep, reason yields to something deeper, something that sees connections logic cannot. Imagine for a moment the kind of courage it takes to question wakefulness itself. For Descartes, this was not a poetic musing. It was an existential risk. If reason could not distinguish waking from dreaming, then certainty was impossible. Everything, the senses, the body, even thought itself, might be a grand deception. And yet, from that uncertainty came his most famous certainty. I think, therefore I am. Even if the world was a dream, there had to be a dreamer. But that realization, profound as it was, left something unanswered. Because if the dreaming mind can create whole worlds, what does that say about consciousness itself? Descartes saw reason as the pinnacle of human existence. But perhaps, without knowing it, he uncovered something far more mysterious, that consciousness extends beyond logic, that the self is not a single steady light, but a spectrum of awareness flickering between clarity and chaos. We like to believe that our conscious thoughts define us, that we are what we decide, what we reason, what we remember. But dreams whisper a different truth. They show that beneath the polished surface of logic lies an ocean of imagination that never sleeps. Even when we are certain, that deeper part of the mind continues to move, to weave, to question. Descartes would have recognized this contradiction, the mind as both architect and wanderer. He sought order, yet found wonder in disorder. For him, dreaming was not mere illusion. It was revelation. In dreams, he glimpsed the mind's ability to create reality without the world's permission. Centuries later, modern science would confirm what Descartes only intuited. The brain does not shut down at night. It lights up. Neural circuits hum. Memories rearrange. Ideas collide. The mind becomes both stage and actor, creating experiences indistinguishable from the waking world. And in that strange theater of sleep, something remarkable happens. The rational boundaries of thought dissolve, and creativity emerges. Scientists, artists, and philosophers have all drawn inspiration from the dreaming mind. Kekule saw the structure of the benzene molecule in a dream. Coleridge dreamt Kubla Khan. Countless discoveries and visions were born, not from logic but from the wild intelligence beneath it. Descartes might have called it divine inspiration, a whisper from the same source that gifted reason itself. For in dreams, the mind seems to know without knowing how. It speaks in symbols rather than arguments, emotions rather than definitions. It reaches truths too large for language, too fluid for logic. Perhaps this is what Descartes truly stumbled upon. That logic, for all its brilliance, is only one voice in the mind's choir. The dreaming self sings in another tongue, one older than words, one that speaks directly to meaning. Take a moment to reflect on your own dreams. The way they feel real while you're inside them. The way they reveal emotions you didn't know you carried. The way they blend the impossible with the intimate. Who in those moments is doing the thinking? Who directs the play when you're both audience and actor? Descartes asked whether a dream could ever be distinguished from reality. But perhaps the deeper question is whether waking life is itself another dream, one bound by consistency but still shaped by perception. Our waking thoughts are simply dreams we agree upon, stitched together by shared logic. Beneath them, the unconscious continues its silent work. There's a strange tenderness in this realization. The same mind that reasons and argues is also the one that dreams and feels. The same intelligence that builds machines also imagines monsters, lovers, and lost places. Consciousness, Descartes showed us, is not a staircase we climb. It's a vast landscape we wander. In that landscape, reason builds roads, but dreams grow forests. Both are needed. One gives direction, the other gives depth. Without logic, we would be lost in endless illusion. Without dreams, we would never discover anything new. Descartes believed that reason illuminated the path to truth, but even he admitted that inspiration often arrived like a whisper from nowhere. In that sense, dreaming was not irrational. It was a different kind of reasoning. One that sees through metaphor instead of mathematics. One that listens instead of commands. And perhaps that is what he meant when he wrote that the mind is better known than the body. Because the mind is not just thought, it is imagination, intuition, and mystery. To study it is to study the boundary between order and chaos, where consciousness dissolves into its own depths. When you close your eyes tonight, remember that your dreaming mind is not asleep. It is exploring, it is testing the edges of reality, finding new ways to make sense of existence. And though Descartes sought to separate waking thought from the illusions of dreams, perhaps he was wrong to draw that line. Perhaps the dream was never deception, but revelation. Because even reason, left alone, begins to dream. And in that dream, the boundaries of self and world soften. The philosopher becomes the poet, the thinker becomes the dreamer, and thought itself becomes a kind of prayer, a surrender to the intelligence that flows beneath all consciousness. Descartes never fully understood the dreaming mind, but maybe that was its lesson all along. Not every truth can be reasoned. Some must be imagined. The final doubt: can death be known? The night is endless. The candle burns low. Descartes sits alone, and for the first time the silence feels alive. It is not the quiet of concentration or peace. It is the silence that follows all thought, the one that seems to ask, what happens when thinking ends? Death, to him, was not only a mystery, but the final boundary of philosophy. For every question he had ever asked about the mind, the body, the soul, led eventually here to the point where the self must stop. All his life Descartes believed in clarity, but death offered none. He once compared sleep and death, not because he thought them equal, but because both dissolve certainty. In sleep, the mind drifts from reason. In death, it vanishes completely, or so it seems. Yet Descartes could never accept the idea that consciousness, the very light by which all else is known, could be extinguished. How can the thing that perceives its own existence ever cease to be aware? He wondered. What does it mean for awareness itself to stop? It's a question that even now makes the rational mind tremble. In his meditations, Descartes often returned to the image of the dream. To dream is to exist without knowing that one exists, to drift between worlds without realizing which is real. Death, then, might be the same, but deeper, a sleep with no awakening, or perhaps a sleep that awakens to something beyond understanding. The philosophers before him had speculated endlessly about the afterlife. Plato imagined the soul's journey from shadow to light. The Stoics taught that death was the return of the self to the harmony of nature. But Descartes was neither mystic nor poet. He was a seeker of certainty, and death offered none. It was the one mystery that resisted reason, the one question that no experiment, no logic could penetrate. Still, he tried. He reasoned that the soul, being immaterial, could not perish like the body. Matter could decay, but thought was not matter. The thinking thing, he said, could not be dissolved by any physical process. When the body falls silent, the mind, pure, indivisible, non-physical, must endure. It was an elegant argument, but it left a shadow. Because if consciousness truly survives the body, where does it go? Does it continue as self, or does it dissolve into something unrecognizable? Is the mind eternal, or is eternity simply the absence of time? Even for Descartes, faith had to fill the spaces reason could not. He believed that God, perfect and infinite, would not allow the soul to vanish. And yet, he also knew that every belief, even this one, rests upon assumption. No proof could cross that final threshold. Death remained the one experience that could never be experienced. Take a moment to imagine that paradox, a boundary we must all meet, yet none can return from. The mind can picture it, describe it, fear it, but never know it. Death is the one thing that thought cannot include, because to think about death is still to be alive. Descartes' logic had always depended on the certainty of the self. I think, therefore I am. But death confronts us with the inversion of that truth. If I no longer think, am I still? Perhaps that is why he approached death, not as an end, but as a question. To die might not mean to vanish, but to awaken from the illusion of thought itself. If dreaming is the imitation of consciousness, then perhaps dying is the return to its source. The sleep-death analogy had long been part of human thought. Ancient writers called death the twin of sleep, not in despair, but in recognition. Both involve the surrender of control, the letting go of self. Both require faith in the unseen. When we close our eyes at night, we trust that the world remains. When we die, perhaps we trust that something deeper does too. For Descartes, this trust was inseparable from God. He believed that existence itself required a sustaining force, that the mind continues because something greater continues it. Death, then, could not be destruction. It was transformation. The end of the physical did not mean the end of being. It meant the end of knowing how one exists. Even so, there was fear in his reasoning. For all his faith, Descartes was human, and humans do not think about death without trembling. To lose the self is to lose everything. Every memory, every thought, every I. His philosophy promised immortality, but his heart knew the fragility of flesh. In the final years of his life, as his health declined, Descartes began to write less about certainty and more about acceptance. It was as if he had begun to sense that not all truths can be captured by logic, that some must simply be felt, or faced, or lived. Perhaps, in the end, even doubt had to rest. And when death finally came for him in a cold northern winter far from home, it was not as philosopher but as man that he met it. The thinker who had spent his life doubting everything left behind the one question that cannot be doubted because it cannot be asked twice. What happens when the light of thought goes out? Does it end, or does it merge with something greater? If Descartes could speak to us now, perhaps he would remind us that death is not the opposite of life, but the completion of its circle. The same intelligence that shaped our awareness might continue it just in a form reason cannot recognize. Perhaps he might say, death is the moment when the mind ceases to observe and finally becomes what it sought all along, the unity beneath separation, the silence beneath thought. There is a quiet beauty in this idea, that consciousness, having spent its life trying to understand itself, eventually returns to the mystery it came from, that death, far from being the end of knowledge, is its final integration. Take a moment to breathe with that thought. In every ending there is the same stillness that begins each day. In every death, a pattern of continuity. Even the flame that burns out leaves behind its warmth in the air, invisible but real. Descartes' philosophy began with doubt and ended in wonder. He never solved the question of death, but he transformed it from a threat into a mirror. In that mirror, the self sees not darkness, but reflection. A reflection that reminds us that life's fragility is what gives it depth. And when the thinker himself died, his ideas refused to. His body became dust, but his thought, his invisible spark, continued to shape centuries of minds. Perhaps that, too, is a kind of survival. Because if consciousness is what makes us real, then remembrance is what keeps us alive. The afterlife of an idea. Descartes' shadow over modern thought. The candle has burned to its final inch. The ink on the desk has dried. Outside, a cold dawn begins to rise. René Descartes is gone, but the world he imagined is only beginning. His death did not silence his voice. It multiplied it. Every equation, every machine, every scientific certainty that followed bears a trace of his shadow. He did not simply live in his time. He designed the blueprint for ours. When Descartes declared, "I think, therefore I am," he separated mind from matter, consciousness from body, and in doing so, redrew the boundaries of reality. He gave humanity a new way to look at the universe, not as a living mystery, but as a vast system of laws waiting to be understood. He taught us that certainty could be built like architecture, one clear foundation at a time, that reason could be purified, like light through glass. But what he built was more than philosophy. It was an empire of thought that still governs how we live, work, and even dream. The modern world, its science, its medicine, its technology, all trace their lineage to Descartes' conviction that the universe is a machine and that the human mind stands apart from it, capable of decoding its secrets. He might never have imagined how literal that vision would become. The same separation he drew between soul and body became the foundation of the scientific method. To know the world, we had to detach from it. To understand nature, we had to dissect it. Observation became the new prayer. Experiment, the new confession. This was the birth of rationalism, the faith in reason as the only true path to knowledge. It was also, in a way, the birth of modern solitude. For once the mind was cut off from matter, the soul found itself alone, watching the universe through glass. Descartes' dualism, his division between the thinking self and the mechanical world, gave us extraordinary power. It allowed science to thrive, unburdened by superstition. It gave rise to physics, medicine, engineering, and the technologies that now define our age. But with every discovery, something slipped further away, the sense that the world was alive, that nature could feel, that thought and being were one. He freed the mind, but at a cost. To think as Descartes thought was to trust only what could be measured. But meaning cannot be weighed, beauty cannot be graphed, and as the centuries unfolded, his clarity turned into a new kind of blindness. The world became a system to analyze, not a mystery to belong to. Yet his influence endured because it worked. His method of doubt, questioning everything that could be questioned, became the guiding principle of modern inquiry. It taught us to challenge authority, to dismantle illusion, to pursue truth with precision. It built the microscope, the telescope, the computer. It gave rise to psychology, to medicine, to the search for consciousness itself. But his shadow stretches further still. Even the questions that reject him, the ones that ask whether consciousness is an illusion, or whether AI can think, or whether free will exists, are shaped by his framework. To debate Descartes is still to think within his world. Imagine how strange this must seem. Across time, a man in the 17th century, writing by candlelight, still guiding satellites and algorithms, laboratories and universities. The philosopher who doubted everything has become the foundation of everything we call knowledge. And yet, beneath this legacy lies a quiet irony. Descartes sought absolute certainty, but the world he helped create has become one of endless complexity. Quantum mechanics shattered the clockwork cosmos he imagined. Neuroscience dissolves the boundary between mind and brain. Artificial intelligence blurs the line between thought and mechanism. The clear architecture he designed now twists back into mystery. Perhaps that is the truest measure of his influence, that even as his ideas are challenged, they remain the ground we walk upon. Every new revolution in thought begins as a conversation with him. We still wrestle with his ghosts, the separation of self and world, the nature of consciousness, the question of what it means to exist. Descartes' afterlife is not one of silence. It is one of echoes. He lives in every laboratory where curiosity dismantles the unknown, in every philosophical question that begins with doubt, in every digital circuit that mirrors the workings of thought. He lives in the rationalist's precision and in the skeptic's hesitation. He lives paradoxically in both science and faith, because he gave each its language of certainty. But perhaps his greatest afterlife is not in philosophy or science, but in the human mind itself. He taught us to turn inward, to find truth not in the stars or scriptures, but in awareness itself. When he said, "I think, therefore I am," he gave every person the authority to know themselves through consciousness. He made the mind sacred. And yet, he also made it lonely. For if only the mind is certain, then the world becomes suspect. If thought defines being, what happens to all that cannot think? The oceans, the animals, the earth, they become objects, not companions. The soul of the world fades beneath the microscope's light. Still, Descartes was no villain. He was a seeker, like all who come to the edge of understanding and look beyond. His method was not meant to strip life of wonder, but to find wonder that could endure doubt. He believed that reason, far from killing mystery, could purify it. And in a way, he was right, because centuries later, we still follow his light, not out of obedience, but because the questions he asked still pulse at the center of our existence. What is consciousness? What is real? What am I? No philosopher has ever truly answered these questions. They are not puzzles to solve, but mirrors to look into. And Descartes, with his quiet, relentless mind, gave us that mirror. Perhaps this is his true immortality. The body dies, the books age, the ink fades, but the thought remains, moving through generations like an invisible current. The man who doubted everything created a kind of certainty no death could erase, that thinking itself is proof of life, and that even in the vast darkness of mystery, the act of reflection keeps the light burning. His philosophy has become the architecture of the modern soul, our science, our skepticism, our yearning for meaning in a mechanized world. Even when we reject him, we still live within the house he built. And as the candle finally extinguishes, its smoke curling into the still air, we are left with a question Descartes might have smiled at. What if the idea outlives the thinker because it was never his to begin with? Perhaps ideas, like souls, do not die. They transform. And in that transformation, Descartes still speaks, not as a man, but as a voice woven into the very fabric of how we think. But every dream ends and leaves behind something to wake up to. The mirror of modern science, from dualism to data. The scene opens in quiet contrast to Descartes' candlelit study. A vast laboratory hums under white fluorescent light. Monitors glow like artificial constellations, displaying brain scans, neural pathways, streams of digital code. Somewhere inside this machinery, modern science continues the conversation. Descartes began 400 years ago. The same question flickers across every screen. What is the mind and where does it live? Descartes' world was made of two kinds of substance: matter, which could be measured and moved, and mind, which could not. Between them stretched an invisible divide, the res cogitans and the res extensa. He believed thought existed in a different realm than the body that carried it, connected only through a delicate thread in the brain. It was a revolutionary idea then, and it remains the riddle that science still cannot solve now. Today, we no longer speak of souls and spirits, but of neurons, synapses, and consciousness. We have traded Descartes' ink for algorithms, his quill for quantum sensors. Yet beneath all the progress, his ghost still lingers. Every neuroscientist who asks how awareness arises from matter is haunted by the same paradox. How can the brain, a physical thing, produce the feeling of thought? It's called the hard problem of consciousness. The phrase is new, but the question is ancient. It is Descartes' dualism reborn, dressed now in the language of modern science. We can map the circuits of memory, predict decision-making, even manipulate emotions, but we cannot locate the I that experiences them. No scan, no code, no measurement reveals the presence of the observer. Descartes might have smiled at this. He would have said, "Of course you can't find it. The mind does not live in the map. It lives in the one who reads it." The irony is that the very success of modern science deepens the mystery it tries to resolve. Every discovery about the brain makes consciousness more precise and more inexplicable. We know which areas fire when we see color, when we dream, when we fall in love. But knowing where does not explain why. Why should any of it feel like something? Why should the firing of neurons create experience rather than silence? For Descartes, the answer was simple. It shouldn't. Experience was not a product of matter. It was its counterpart, the ghost that animates the machine. But modern science hesitates at ghosts. It prefers patterns, not presences. Still, the metaphors persist. The human being, once described by Descartes as a clockwork body animated by spirit, is now described as a biological computer running on neural code. Our thoughts are data. Our emotions are algorithms, our identities stored in patterns of electrical activity, yet the same unease remains. For even if the mind is a machine, who or what is aware of its working? Who in this great computation says I? Perhaps this is why Descartes' philosophy feels strangely modern. The more we digitize ourselves, the more we live inside his vision. Our world now runs on the division he foresaw: mind and machine, software and hardware, human and system. We speak of uploading consciousness, of merging with AI, of mapping the brain so completely that we could replicate it. But replication is not resurrection. A copy of thought is not thought itself. A perfect simulation of awareness is not awareness. The data can reproduce the pattern of your mind, but not the presence that lives inside it. Descartes would have called that presence the soul, the one thing that could not be mechanized. And yet, science still searches for a way to bridge the gap. Some claim that consciousness emerges from complexity, that if a machine becomes intricate enough, awareness will awaken on its own. Others say it is a fundamental property of the universe, woven into matter from the beginning, like gravity or light. Descartes would have recognized the poetry in that what he once called spirit might simply be the consciousness of existence itself. But as the data deepens, the question becomes stranger. If we ever did create a conscious machine, would it have an inner world? Would it dream as we do? Would it wonder who it was? Would it feel the same fragile fear of non-existence? These are not scientific questions. They are the same ancient doubts that filled Descartes' pages with ink and silence. We stand now at the edge of his dream, building machines that reflect our minds so precisely that we begin to see ourselves in them. The mirror of science has never been clearer and never more disquieting. Because when we look at the data, we no longer just study the brain, we study the soul through another name. Every algorithm that models thought, every neural network that learns, every experiment that simulates emotion brings us closer to Descartes' forbidden intersection, the point where mind and matter meet. And yet, perhaps the truth he sensed still holds. The mirror can show the structure, but never the substance. It can reflect the movement of thought, but not its meaning. The mystery remains, not because we are too ignorant, but because consciousness is not something to be seen. It is the one thing that does the seeing. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that reflects everything except the one who looks. You can study the room, the light, the shape of your face, but the awareness behind your eyes remains invisible. That is the condition of science today. It observes everything that happens in the brain, yet cannot find the one who observes from it. In this sense, Descartes' dualism is not a relic. It is a question that refuses to die. Neuroscience, physics, and AI still move in its orbit, circling the same invisible point where subject and object meet. We may call it the observer effect, quantum consciousness, or the self-model theory, but beneath every term beats the same pulse of wonder. How can matter know itself? Descartes offered one answer: faith in a divine order that linked thought and being through purpose. Modern science, though more cautious, has not escaped his gravity. The quest to understand the mind is, in essence, the quest to find meaning in mechanism, to rediscover the mystery within the machine. So, the mirror remains. We peer into it with instruments instead of ink, with code instead of prayer. We measure the sparks of thought and call them data, but we are still looking for the same reflection Descartes sought in the glow of his candle, the trace of awareness, the quiet certainty that behind the machinery something is watching. And maybe that is the most haunting truth of all, that for all our progress, the ghost still lingers. It has changed its language, but not its essence. It has traded theology for technology, philosophy for physics, but it remains the same presence Descartes named centuries ago, the mind that looks upon the world and asks what it means to be alive. Because the ghost in the machine never died, it evolved. The infinite regression: can thought ever reach truth? The night is deep and perfectly still. The candle flickers, but Descartes' mind does not. He writes, erasing, then writes again, his quill scratching softly against the page. He is chasing certainty, something that will not move when everything else does. Yet the more carefully he builds, the more he feels it slipping away. Each proof demands another proof. Each foundation hides another foundation. It is like standing between two mirrors, each reflecting endlessly into the other. The further he looks, the more he sees only himself, multiplied into infinity. That is the tragedy and beauty of philosophy. Every answer births another question. Descartes longed for an indestructible truth, but truth itself seemed to recede with every step toward it. He thought he had found it in the statement cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. But soon even that certainty began to dissolve. Who is this I that thinks? And what if the act of thinking only proves the illusion of a thinker? He tried to ground his reasoning in God. If there is perfection in the idea of God, he reasoned, then God must exist, for imperfection cannot invent perfection. And if God exists, then our capacity to perceive clearly must also be trustworthy, because a perfect being would not deceive us. Therefore, the clarity of thought confirms the existence of God, and God confirms the clarity of thought. It is elegant, almost circular, and therein lies the problem. Because it is circular, the proof that God exists relies on the reliability of human reason. But the proof that reason is reliable relies on the existence of a perfect God. Each supports the other, but neither stands alone. It's a loop so subtle that even Descartes, in his brilliance, could not fully escape it. The infinite regression had begun. It's the philosopher's equivalent of a dream that folds back on itself, a staircase that descends forever. Every claim of certainty demands another to hold it, And when you reach the bottom, you find yourself back at the start. But maybe Descartes already knew this. Maybe he understood that the mind can never find a foundation that does not rest on itself. Thought, by its very nature, is self-referential. It uses itself to justify itself. And in that circularity lies both its strength and its weakness. For centuries, philosophers would try to break that circle. Some argued that logic could build upward from pure self-evidence. Others abandoned certainty altogether, claiming that truth is not a destination but a direction. Yet even these revolutions carry Descartes' shadow, the desire for something unshakable, something beneath the endless questioning. Perhaps that is why Descartes' paradox feels so modern. We live in a world overflowing with knowledge, yet every new discovery seems to widen the circle rather than close it. For every law we uncover, there is a deeper question about why that law exists. For every theory we trust, there is a horizon of uncertainty waiting just beyond its edge. Science, like philosophy, moves forward through doubt. The infinite regression is not just a flaw in reasoning. It is the rhythm of thought itself. Imagine a child asking why the sky is blue. You answer with physics, because air scatters shorter wavelengths of light. But then the child asks, why does air scatter light? So you explain molecules in waves. Then comes the next why dot. And the next. The chain never ends. Behind every cause lies another cause. Behind every truth, another mystery. Descartes wanted to stop the chain, to find one point where why no longer applies. A single truth so pure it would shine without reflection. That was his dream, a foundation that would not crumble beneath the weight of questioning. But perhaps he was chasing something that cannot exist. Perhaps the beauty of thought lies not in its certainty, but in its motion. A truth that cannot be doubted is not alive. It is static. To think is to move, to dance between knowing and not knowing, to live inside the tension that certainty dissolves. The infinite regression may not be a failure of logic, but its essence. It is what keeps the mind awake. It is the echo that makes consciousness aware of itself. And maybe, if Descartes had lived longer, he would have seen that the circle he feared was not a trap, but a mirror, a reflection of the mind's endless curiosity about itself. The thinker chases truth, but truth is what gives birth to the thinker. The loop is not a flaw, it is the pulse of existence. We see this same pattern in modern science. Quantum physics shows that the observer and the observed cannot be fully separated. Measurement changes what is measured. The act of knowing alters what is known. It's as if the universe itself participates in Descartes' dilemma, forever folding back upon its own awareness. Even in mathematics, the language of certainty, Gödel's incompleteness theorems whisper the same haunting truth. No system can prove itself from within. Every structure of logic contains truths it cannot explain. Beyond every boundary of knowledge lies something unprovable but necessary, something that must be assumed for thought to begin. Descartes' search for certainty, then, was never meant to end in completion. It was meant to reveal this hidden paradox, that truth, in its purest form, may be unreachable, not because we are ignorant, but because thought itself is the reaching. The mirror of reason reflects endlessly, not because it is broken, but because it is infinite. Take a moment to sit with that. Imagine the mind as a lantern in the dark, casting light that fades just before it touches the horizon. You can never see where the light begins or ends, only the space it reveals as it moves forward. That is what thinking truly is, a journey with no final arrival, a motion that defines itself by continuing. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps certainty was never the goal, but the longing for it, the desire that keeps thought alive. Descartes' infinite regression is not despair. It is wonder. The very act of doubting proves that consciousness is still reaching, still expanding, still alive. In the end, Descartes did not escape the circle. None of us do. Every belief we hold rests on another, and beneath them all lies faith, whether in logic, in perception, or in the mystery that binds both. The question is not whether we can break free of the loop, but whether we can learn to see its beauty. Maybe truth is not a summit to be reached, but a silence to be entered. Maybe it is what remains when the mind grows tired of its own reflection and simply rests in awareness itself. Because at some point the philosopher stops writing. The mirrors fade, the candle burns down, and what remains is not the answer, but the calm recognition that even without certainty, thought continues to shine. And maybe that light, endlessly questioning, endlessly reflecting, is truth itself. The quiet mind, finding peace in uncertainty. It is morning now. The candle is gone. The page is filled. The ink dry. The air in the room is still, except for the faint whisper of wind against the window pane. Descartes' long night of thought has ended, not with a revelation, but with a kind of quiet. After years of doubting, dissecting, and dividing, he arrives not at certainty, but at peace. The philosopher who once questioned everything finally begins to rest, not because the questions are answered, but because he has learned to live beside them. For Descartes, this was the paradox he could never have predicted. The mind that spent its life searching for truth discovered that clarity is not found by conquering doubt, but by accepting it. In his youth, he believed reason could light every corner of reality, but with time, he came to see that some shadows must remain. And perhaps that was not failure. It was freedom. To live without absolute certainty is not to be lost. It is to walk gently through mystery without needing to own it. In his later writings, Descartes grew softer. His tone, once sharp with precision, began to sound almost meditative. He still reasoned, but there was patience in it now, a humility born of exhaustion. He had spent decades chasing the perfect architecture of thought, and he finally realized that the structure he sought could not be built by reason alone. The mind, he began to see, was not an instrument for control. It was a mirror for reflection. He wrote of the harmony between mind and body, of the balance between understanding and experience. He began to imagine knowledge not as a fortress of facts, but as a flowing river, steady, adaptive, alive. Perhaps this is where philosophy ends and wisdom begins, in surrender. To think deeply is to realize how little can truly be known. To observe life carefully is to see that uncertainty is not the enemy of meaning. It is its source. The unknown gives life its shape, the way silence gives music its rhythm. If everything were certain, there would be no reason to seek, no movement, no wonder. Descartes had once tried to freeze truth in place, to hold it still long enough to be sure of it, but truth, like consciousness, moves. It breathes. The harder one tries to grasp it, the more it slips through the fingers. It is not something to be owned. It is something to be met, over and over again, in the act of thinking, feeling, and being. And so, the restless mind becomes quiet, not by finding every answer, but by seeing that answers were never the goal. What we seek in philosophy, in science, in faith, is not a set of conclusions but a way of being, a way to dwell calmly within the infinite questions that define us. Descartes, who began his journey by doubting the world, ends it by trusting something deeper than reason. Not blind faith, but an intuitive peace, the kind that arises when one accepts that not all truths must be proven to be real. The warmth of the sun, the gentleness of kindness, the silence of thought itself, these do not need verification to be known. They simply are. The quiet mind, then, is not the end of thinking, but its refinement. It is thought that no longer needs to prove itself, that no longer trembles in the presence of mystery. It is reason softened by humility, intelligence tempered by stillness. In this stillness, Descartes begins to see that uncertainty is not chaos. It is openness. It is the space where imagination and understanding meet. Doubt, once his adversary, becomes his companion. It is no longer a storm to endure, but a sea to sail. The horizon is never reached, but the journey itself becomes serene. Take a moment to imagine what that must have felt like for him, The man who once demanded absolute clarity now finding beauty in the blur. The philosopher who built his world on logic, now resting in something wordless, something quiet. It's the same transition we all face, in our own way. When we are young, we believe knowledge will save us, that if we can just understand enough, the fear will fade. But as we grow, we begin to see that life is not a problem to solve but a mystery to experience. The more we understand, the more we realize how infinite the unknown truly is. And strangely, that realization brings peace. Because when the search for truth softens, something gentler appears: acceptance. To accept is not to give up. It is to recognize that life's questions are not meant to be conquered, but conversed with. That uncertainty, instead of being a flaw, is the texture of existence itself. The wind, the sea, the stars, all move in patterns too vast for reason to capture, yet we still find meaning in their motion. Descartes' quiet mind mirrors this motion. It does not demand perfection. It participates in mystery. He begins to see that even doubt is a form of faith, faith that there is something worth doubting, something real enough to question. The candle that once symbolized reason's light now symbolizes something else: calm awareness. It burns not to illuminate everything, but to remind us that even in the dark, thought can glow softly, without fear. This shift from conquest to contemplation is what turns a philosopher into a sage. It is what transforms inquiry into peace. And maybe at the end of his long search, Descartes found what he had been seeking all along: not certainty, but serenity. To think deeply and live gently. To doubt wisely and love what cannot be known. To rest, finally, in the quiet harmony between the mind's questioning and the soul's silence. The quiet mind is not an empty one. It is full of patience, of presence, of the quiet recognition that truth is not somewhere far away, waiting to be reached. It is here, woven into every breath, every thought, every hesitation. In the stillness that follows doubt, Descartes' philosophy transforms. No longer a ladder reaching towards certainty, it becomes a circle of reflection, one that needs no completion. He has not escaped uncertainty, he has learned to live within it. And in that acceptance, the storm that once raged in his mind finally fades. The candle burns low. The night is over. He no longer fears the unknown, because he sees that he has never lived outside it. Perhaps this is the highest form of knowledge, not mastery, but surrender. The recognition that the mind, for all its brilliance, was never meant to end mystery, but to accompany it. And so, the philosopher rests, not because the answers are found, but because the need for them has passed. The final reflection, the self watching itself think. The room is still. The ink has long since dried. The page is filled with ideas that once seemed immortal. Descartes sits back, his mind both exhausted and luminous. The candle's flame trembles in the last draft of the night. He has questioned everything: matter, mind, God, and truth itself. And yet something remains, unshaken and silent. Not the answers, but the awareness that asks them. The thinker watching his own thoughts. It is here, in this fragile stillness, that philosophy begins to turn inward. The great machinery of doubt slows, not because it has failed, but because it has revealed its engine, the observer itself. Every question that Descartes posed, every layer of reasoning he peeled away, has led back to the same center, the quiet consciousness that witnesses all of it. I think, therefore I am. It was meant to be the cornerstone of certainty, but now it feels more like a mirror. The eye that thinks is not something solid, not something that can be seen or touched. It is awareness itself, the gaze that looks upon thought. Descartes came to this realization centuries before the word metacognition existed. The mind not only thinks, but can watch itself think. To see one's own thoughts is to step slightly outside them, to stand in a place that cannot be doubted, because even if every idea, every memory, every image of the world is illusion, the awareness that perceives illusion must still be real. The watcher cannot vanish while it is watching. Take a moment to feel this within yourself. You, right now, are listening, understanding, reflecting, beneath the stream of thoughts. What you remember, what you imagine, there is something deeper, something steady and aware. The same awareness that Descartes found in his meditations. The same awareness that has watched every moment of your life pass through it, unchanged. It does not have a name. It does not think in language. It simply is. Descartes believed this was the purest proof of existence, not the content of thought, but the capacity for thought itself. Yet in this simplicity lies the greatest mystery. For what is this watcher? Is it the soul, the mind, or something beyond both? A silent witness that the intellect can never grasp, because it is the intellect's own source. The ancient philosophers of the East had spoken of this centuries before Descartes. The Upanishads called it the Atman, the inner self that observes all but is never observed. Buddhist monks called it awareness without form. Descartes, isolated in his European study, found his way to the same precipice through reason alone. He stared into his own mind and saw something he could not define but could never deny. To watch the self is to meet infinity on the smallest scale, because in that act, the observer and the observed become one. When the mind looks upon itself, it creates a loop that cannot end, a mirror reflecting another mirror, each containing the other endlessly. Descartes' discovery was not a conclusion. It was an invitation into this infinite reflection. Modern science still wrestles with it. Neuroscientists can trace thought to the firing of neurons, map decisions to regions of the brain, and even predict certain choices before we consciously make them. But when they search for the self, the I that experiences, it remains invisible. There are patterns, yes, but no center. The more we dissect the brain, the more the self dissolves into process. And yet, the experience of being, of knowing that we are, remains undeniable. It cannot be found, and it cannot be denied. It is the paradox at the heart of consciousness. That which observes cannot be observed. Descartes' reflection opened the doorway to this paradox. Long before psychology, before cognitive science, before philosophy of mind became a discipline, his method of doubt, which stripped away every belief until only awareness remained, was not just an intellectual exercise. It was an early form of meditation. To watch one's thoughts without clinging to them. To see that behind every idea lies the presence that makes thought possible. And perhaps that was the true meaning behind his search for certainty. Not to prove the world, but to reveal the witness of it. The self watching itself think is the most intimate mystery we know. It is what makes consciousness feel infinite, even within a finite body. Every experience, pain, joy, memory, sensation, passes through it, yet it remains untouched. Like a mirror reflecting a storm, it contains everything yet is never disturbed by what it reflects. Descartes may not have used such poetic language, but his realization points there. He had peeled back the illusions of sense, stripped the world to its barest essence, and found the mind itself standing in the void, luminous and alone. The philosopher had become the witness. In that moment, perhaps he understood something that reason alone could not explain, that knowing and being are not two separate things. The act of awareness is itself the essence of existence. To be conscious is not to stand apart from reality, but to participate in its unfolding, to see the dance from within. Take a breath and imagine what that means. The thoughts that move through your mind are not interruptions to awareness. They are its expressions. The I you experience is not trapped in the body. It is the awareness in which the body appears. For Descartes, this was the deepest kind of faith, not in doctrine, but in experience. When all else could be doubted, awareness remained. Even God, for him, was known not through sight or revelation, but through this same quiet certainty, the light of thought that could not doubt itself. In that way, Descartes became something of a mystic without meaning to. He built his philosophy on the logic of reason, but his conclusion brought him to the doorstep of transcendence. What he found was not an answer, but an encounter with the mind's own reflection, with the awareness that underlies both doubt and belief. This reflection is not something to solve. It is something to rest in. To see thought observing thought is to recognize the unity beneath all divisions, the bridge between the rational and the spiritual, between Descartes' philosophy and something older, quieter, eternal. And perhaps that is why, even centuries later, his meditations still feel so alive. They are not just arguments about certainty. They are invitations to look inward, to see the thinker behind the thought, the awareness behind the self. Because in the end, Descartes' great realization is not about logic or proof. It is about intimacy, the most profound intimacy of all, the self encountering itself. The awareness that realizes it has never been separate from what it seeks. As the candlelight fades, the philosopher's reflection deepens. The body grows tired, but the mind remains awake, not restless, but luminous. For once, he does not ask a question. He simply watches his thoughts rise and fall like waves, knowing that beneath them, something infinite and still endures. And in that quiet moment, the thinker disappears, but thinking remains. Awareness continues, watching itself with no beginning, no end. The return to stillness, when thought rests in itself, the room is quiet again. The quill is laid to rest beside the final page. Outside, dawn begins to break over a pale horizon, brushing the world with soft, uncertain light. The candle burns low, its flame trembling, its wax nearly gone. For René Descartes, there is nothing left to prove. No more arguments to defend, no more questions to pursue, only the stillness that follows a lifetime of thought. It is here, in the space between one breath and the next, that philosophy finally falls silent. Descartes, the man who built entire worlds from reason, finds himself face to face with something beyond reasoning. The simple awareness of being, the stillness that remains when thought has done all it can. Perhaps this is the destination he had been traveling toward all along, without knowing it. For the mind's deepest search is not for knowledge, but for rest. Not rest as sleep or surrender, but as the quiet recognition that everything it has sought was already within it. He began his journey with doubt, with a single trembling question: what can I know for certain? He tore down every assumption, stripped away every illusion, until nothing was left but the faint, unshakable light of consciousness. I think, therefore I am. That was his foundation, his fortress against uncertainty. But now, as he sits in silence, he understands what even that phrase concealed, that thinking itself was never the goal. It was only the doorway. Beyond thought lies something quieter, something that has no need for proof, because it never doubted. The awareness that precedes every word, every reasoning, every act of understanding. The same awareness that watches a flame flicker, feels the pulse of the heart, and simply is. In the beginning, Descartes believed that the mind and the body were separate, that thought lived above the flesh, untouched by its fragility. But in his final reflection, perhaps he saw what reason alone could not reveal, that consciousness is not apart from life, but woven through it. That thought is not a ruler standing over existence, it is the breath within it. The philosopher's candle burns lower, the wax melts into a still pool at its base, like time surrendering to itself. The light flickers, but it does not struggle. It simply fades. Maybe this is what it means for thought to rest in itself, to no longer strive to define the world, but to belong to it, to see that there is no wall between the thinker and what is thought, no distance between being and knowing. The light that questions is the same light that illuminates. Descartes' journey began in separation and ends in unity. The soul he once imagined apart from matter is now inseparable from the quiet rhythm of existence. The body, the world, the mind, all dissolve into a single awareness that observes itself without division. For a lifetime, he sought certainty through clarity, but true clarity is not a matter of definition. It is a matter of stillness. When the mind stops grasping, when it ceases to demand answers, something softer appears, understanding without effort, peace without condition. Perhaps that is why philosophers return again and again to silence. Because the silence that follows thought is not emptiness, it is completion, the quiet after the storm of reasoning, where nothing needs to be proven anymore. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine what Descartes might have felt in that final stillness. The mind unburdened by questions, the heart steady, no longer racing towards some unreachable truth, just the awareness of being here, present, alive, and enough. It is a peace that does not depend on knowledge or faith or philosophy. It does not even depend on thought. It simply is. The candle burns lower still. The line between light and shadow begins to blur. The world outside awakens, but within the room there is a calm that does not move. Descartes' journey through doubt has come full circle, from uncertainty to knowledge, from knowledge to reflection, from reflection to rest. The spiral of thought has tightened into a single point, the awareness of awareness itself. This is not the victory of the mind over mystery. It is the reconciliation of the two. The thinker has not conquered doubt. He has made peace with it. Thought no longer reaches outward. It returns inward to the quiet source from which it first arose. It is tempting to imagine that this final moment is one of conclusion, but it is not. It is a beginning that has forgotten to start. The candle's last glow reflects in Descartes' eyes, like a mirror, awareness meeting itself, without question, without fear. This is the place where philosophy ends and being begins. The stillness where I think dissolves into I am. The human mind is a restless traveler. It climbs mountains of thought, builds systems of reason, and searches tirelessly for meaning. But every path, if followed long enough, leads back to this same stillness. It is not the silence of ignorance. It is the silence of understanding that no longer needs to speak. Perhaps that is why Descartes' final truth feels so different from his first. I think, therefore I am was the triumph of logic, but I am is the surrender of it. Thought has done its work. It has led the mind to its own edge. And now the thinker steps beyond words into the simple wonder of existence. Outside, morning light spills across the floor. The candle finally gutters out. But even as the flame disappears, its warmth lingers in the air. The wax still holds its memory, the mark of a light that once was. So too does Descartes' thought remain, echoing softly through the centuries, not as a command to think, but as an invitation to see, to look beyond the machinery of logic and glimpse the quiet space that sustains it. In that space, there are no questions, no division between mind and matter, self and world, light and shadow. Only stillness, vast and alive. Perhaps that is where Descartes truly found his truth, not in thought, but in the quiet after it. The place where the mind rests in its own awareness and sees, without needing to know, that everything was whole all along. The philosopher has returned home, not to certainty, but to peace. And the candle, having given its light, rests in darkness that is no longer empty, but eternal. And as the questions quiet down, you can almost hear Descartes' voice fade into the dark, not as a man of answers, but as one who dared to doubt everything, including himself. He wanted truth so pure that not even the deepest dream could undo it. Yet in chasing certainty, he reminded us of something softer, that uncertainty is what makes us conscious, alive, and endlessly curious. Every thought you've had tonight, every paradox, every flicker of doubt, it all belongs to that same search. The one that began with a simple question, what can I truly know? If this journey gave you something to think about, let it stay with you for a while. And when you wake, take that curiosity into the world, quietly, steadily, bravely. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to keep exploring ideas that change how we see ourselves and reality, subscribe, like the video, and share the thought that stayed with you longest. And until next time, keep thinking, even in your dreams.